Chapter 17. The dry sea breeze had hardened the surface of the whale meat, making the meat taste tough on the outside and tender on the inside. It felt like eating jerky. It was a unique taste. Yes, jerky. Xiao Qishi's eyes suddenly widened as he had a bold idea. Since they couldn't finish the whale meat, could they tear it into pieces and dry it in the sun to make convenient whale jerky? Well, it seemed feasible. Unlike the family of 3 polar bears who were a little afraid of joining the fight for food, Xiao Qishi and Ao Daisai weren't afraid. They crushed many polar bears in terms of momentum alone. Even if some fat bears looked at them with unfriendly and inquisitive eyes, that was all. Ao Daisai didn't even bother to look at the other polar bears. He occupied the position where he had eaten last time and was responsible for passing the meat. Because he wasn't very hungry this time, he didn't wolf down the food. Ao Daisai's table manners were obviously much more refined. The main reason was that he thought Xiao Qishi was hungry, so he pestered him to come over and eat the meat. It's not like that. Xiao Qishi carried the whale meat in a small yellow bucket and sent it to a relatively flat rock nearby to dry. At this time, all the polar bears were gathered around the whale, so no thief would steal his food. Under the camera of the drone, the little polar bear's round but flexible figure could be seen busily moving back and forth on the beach. It was especially full of the atmosphere of a hard-working life. When people saw little bears spread the meat flat on the rock, they were a little shocked and in disbelief. This was the behavior of storing food. According to research, polar bears didn't have such a characteristic. In nature, of course, there were many animals that had the nature of storing food, such as squirrels, bees, and even alligators. But polar bears happened to not be in this range. They didn't store food for more than 2 days. Well, maybe the food transported by little bear could be finished in 2 days. That was normal. People decided to observe more. Ao Daisai's appetite was unusually big. Seriously speaking, the food transported by Xiao Qishi was really nothing. He just wanted to make some snacks with a different taste for himself. He wasn't even sure if Ao Daisai would like them. Speaking of Ao Daisai, he also noticed little bear's strange behavior. As usual, he did not understand, but as usual, he did not express his opinion. Perhaps it was just that little bear had invented a new game, and he was quite willing to cooperate as long as Xiao Qishi was happy. Anyway, he had nothing to do. Other than eating and sleeping, Ao Daisai's time was free. Just like when he was a bachelor, he ate and slept until he was full and had a lot of time to daydream. In the winter, they would stroll around on the ice or find a high place with a good view to take a nap. They would stay there for most of the day. Ao Daisai did not like to move during the summer. If they could find a cool place to hide, Ao Daisai would not come out. Ever since she had the little bear, her life had changed a lot. At the very least, there would be fewer opportunities for him to slack off this summer. It was impossible for him to close his eyes and open them in the blink of an eye for 3 months. The energetic and lively little bear could only sleep for a few hours. Ao Daisai, who was full, licked its fangs and continued to dig out meat until Xiao Qishi was tired of playing. Playing with food was not allowed by Mother Bear. At least, the little bear cubs next door did not have such treatment. Their mother would urge them to finish eating quickly and then take them to a safe place to rest. Mother Bear, who was threatened by the other polar bears, had no choice but to take the little bear cubs to the position occupied by Ao Daisai. An even stronger and taller male polar bear gave Mother Bear a fright. She was very afraid, but in the next second, she saw Xiao Qishi, who was foolishly holding a small bucket in her mouth. Xiao Qishi seemed to be disturbed by their sudden appearance. Her cheerful little steps paused, and she turned her head to look at her. Little bear? He was round and fat, and he was not small. But standing next to an adult polar bear, he still looked young. He was indeed an underage little bear. Were they together? A male with a cub. Mother Bear immediately fell into confusion and confusion. But what was certain was that there was a little bear here, which made Mother Bear lower her guard by a lot. They were all broken-winged angels with cubs. Why should they hurt each other? Xiao Qishi came back to her senses and immediately guessed why Mother Bear had brought her cub over. Ao Daisai was very fierce, and the other polar bears did not dare to come over. If not for the fact that they had no other choice, this mother bear probably would not have come over to be a pain in the ass. Little Bear is so cute. He's sticking his head out from behind Mother Bear's, but he's so small and looks like he just came out of the nest not long ago. He should eat more meat to get fat. Xiao Qixi turned around and rubbed against Ao Daisai, who was in a state of alert. She even put down her old face and acted cute, making cute sound to soften the other's unfriendly aura. Xiao Qixi rarely acted like this. At most, she would make a few sounds to express her happiness. But today, other than happiness, she was also excited. Ao Daisai licked the little bear, acting cute. As expected, most of its attention was immediately diverted, and the aura all over its body softened uncontrollably. He was wary of the female bear only because he did not like strange polar bears coming close. At the same time, it was also for Xiao Qixi's safety. Now that it realized that Xiao Qixi was not afraid of the female bear and was even quite happy, Oak Daisai did not care anymore and only used its eyes to warn her. When the male polar bear in front of her licked the little bear, Mother Bear confirmed that they were together. A male polar bear who had raised the little bear. Very good. Mother Bear felt a trace of relief amidst the chaos. Everyone was doing this for the cub. After Mother Bear confirmed that she would not be chased away or hurt, she immediately tore at the whale's skin impatiently. The two little bears at her feet stood up and raised their little paws, just like Xiao Qixi before. They were waiting to be fed. Xiao Qixi was much luckier than them. She ate every meal alone and was full. The little bear brothers could only fight to eat a piece of meat. The female bear who was focused on eating was probably a new mother. She did not help to tear the meat apart and ate with relish. After admiring the little bear family of 3 for a while, Xiao Qixi continued to move the whale meat. God, he delayed for a while and did not look. He was worried that a polar bear would eat his meat. In the end, there was no polar bear eating his meat, but there was a bold sea dove eyeing his meat like a tiger watching its prey, waiting for an opportunity to make a move. Xiao Qixi would not give a chance to succeed. After moving a last round, she sat there and did not leave. Why should she give up the country that she had fought for to the sea dove? Ao Daisai, who was waiting nearby, could not wait for Little Bear to return. It stood up and stretched its neck to look for him. When it saw Little Bear fighting with the sea dove on the rock, it dropped everything and ran to help. When the sea dove heard the polar bear's roar, it immediately fled in a panic and disappeared. In the following time, Little Bear and Big Bear lay together, guarding the country that they had fought for. Oh no, the mountain of meat. Eat a piece when you're hungry? No, no, no. If you're hungry, go back and eat the public food. Don't eat the private food first. Save it for later. Xiao Qixi little abacus crackled loudly. He was so happy that he dreamed of tall mountain of meat that he could not finish no matter how much he ate. This was the nth time that he had such a clear dream. Little Bear was suddenly curious. Could Ao Daisai dream? It seemed so. Scientists said that animals could also dream. Xiao Qixi could not help but look at Ao Daisai, who was dozing off. What was this pure, wild polar bear thinking every day? What was in his dream? What was his world like? Besides eating, drinking, and sleeping, did he have any other pursuits? He was really curious. A few days passed like this. About a week or so, Xiao Qixi's private food increased, and the beached whales ate less and less. The fat people who followed the smell here caught the last carnival, but they also tasted the loneliness and emptiness after the food was gone. Without food, they would have to embark on a journey of searching again, trying their luck that they did not know when the next time would come. During this time, of course, there were also polar bears eyeing Xiao Qixi's private food, but they were all beaten away by Ao Daisai. Ao Daisai was the big brother bear that had eaten Xiao Qixi before. He did not take the ordinary polar bear seriously. Hashtag the beached whales have finished eating, and the polar bears on the coast are about to go their separate ways. Hashtag in the photo, there was a huge beached whale, and only its skeleton and head were left. More than a dozen polar bears of different shades of color left separately. It felt like a carnival party had ended, and people could taste a trace of loneliness and sadness. The patient mother bear took the children to lick the last bit of meat on the whale's skeleton. This scene made people feel a trace of melancholy. Where should they go next? Would they encounter such a feast again? In the end, even a mother bear left the beach with the two little polar bears. On this once lively coast, in an instant, only Xiao Qixi and Ao Daisai's figures were left. Xiao Qixi, who liked lively scenes, was affected by some of the scattered banquets. It was a pity. Ao Daisai, who liked to be alone, was not affected at all. He even liked the peace and quiet. The little bear stood on a rock and looked down. The huge skeleton of the whale and the empty and quiet beach were enough to write a desolate elegy. However, Xiao Qixi was not a big shot with artistic cells. When he saw this scene, he could only say, "Ah, there's no more food." Fortunately, there's a pile of jerky behind him, enough for them to stay here for a few days before looking for food. In contrast, Ao Daisai obviously did not think so much. After the surroundings were quiet, he lay on the rock and twisted his body, rubbing his itchy back while basking in the sun. What a carefree cutie. In addition to rolling on the ground, polar bears were also famous for finding a protruding rock to rub their buttocks. This, so embarrassing. All bears were the same. This was an indispensable after-dinner activity. Xiao Qixi occasionally saw Ao Daisai rub his buttocks. Even if the handsome and cute Ao Daisai did this, it inevitably revealed a strong sense of wretchedness. It couldn't be helped. This action was too obscene. If Xiao Qixi was still human, he might have laughed like a pig. However, he was a bear, so he swore that he would never do this, even if no humans were watching. No, there were a bunch of humans watching them. There was even a forum that constantly updated their lives. The country that Xiao Qixi thought was well protected had long been exposed in the form of photos in public. Look, the ice layer that melted in advance forced the polar bear to have a high IQ. OMG, it actually knows how to store food. Haha. I still say the same thing. Quickly tie me up and let him go to school. There should be a place for him in Tsinghua University. Yulishanda is awesome. It makes people wonder if he is transmigrated. Haha, this is a fantasy world. Do you think this is a fantasy world? Transmigration? Yes. There must be a delicate boy living under Yulishanda's bare skin, a boy who loves cleanliness. If that's the case, Ao Daisai has also transmigrated. Could it be that they transmigrated together? Speaking of which, Ao Daisai is so good to Yulishanda. Ah, rooster crows. I can write a 100,000-word romance novel with this interaction. It's too doting. Upstairs, I have to remind you that both of them are males. Even if it's a novel, it can't be posted in the romance section. You can only post it on some gay websites and forums. Only gay websites and forums would go crazy to see two male polar bears in a relationship. Don't think too much. Ao Daisai and Yulishanda obviously have a pure brotherly relationship. Only you humans have such impure thoughts. Bah, upstairs, you've read too much into a dog's stomach. There aren't too many gays in the animal world, okay? There aren't too many gays in the animal world +1. In terms of impure thoughts, humans are not even on the list. Do you need me to explain to you how many partners dolphins have in bed? Dolphins do that kind of thing for comfort and excitement. What does it have to do with us polar bears if they don't behave properly? One look at the polar bear's face, and you could tell that it was very pure and serious. It had no evil intentions at all. Ao Daisai, who was thought to be very pure and serious, never left the little bear that he picked up. Recently, the temperature had risen by 2 to 3 degrees. It was not that cool anymore. It was a temperature that Ao Daisai did not like. He hoped that this kind of summer would pass quickly. However, Ao Daisai still liked to hug the little bear to sleep. The little bear's nose was cold, and the tip of its round nose was always a little moist. Its body was soft, and its white and fluffy fur gave off a nice smell. When Xiao Qixi slept, Ao Daisai kept a little awake. He was multitasking and helping the other to guard the meat pile. To be honest, with two polar bears lying there in a row, even if the sea doves were brave, they would not dare to come close. When Xiao Qixi woke up, she opened her eyes and yawned. Ao Daisai was so hot that he temporarily left him to take a bath at the beach and get some fresh air. If it was last year, he would have soaked in the sea for a longer time. However, he could not do so now. He was worried that other carnivores would attack the little bear. Soaking in the bath became an extravagant hope. After a little cooling, Aodisai came up from the sea. He rolled on the grass skillfully and cleaned himself up as soon as possible. Then, he returned to Qiao Qixi side and stayed there. As soon as Aodisai came back, Qiao Qixi picked up the dried meat and fed it to him, because that was the only way Aodisai would eat it. Really, it made people feel helpless and touched. It was as if the dried meat was Qiao Qixi's food by default. Aodisai never touched it. However, if the little bear fed it to him, he would not refuse. It seemed that it was not to fill his stomach. It was just to make Qiao Qixi happy. Such a gentle Aodisai covered this summer with a romantic filter. Chapter 18. In early July, when there were no dark clouds, the temperature gradually rose, hatching all kinds of insect eggs, causing the number of mosquitoes on the shore to increase dramatically. They became the most annoying thing for the polar bears, other than hunger and high temperature. The dried whale meat in the sea breeze would not grow insect eggs in a short period of time. It would only attract the covetous and harassment of all kinds of mosquitoes. Qiao Qixi did not want to share food with the flies, so she finished the dried meat as soon as possible, leaving only a small bucket for the road. The flowers and plants on the shore had already grown to the height of an arm. All kinds of small animals on land frequently appeared, such as groundhogs, gray rabbits, wild ducks that laid eggs by the water, and so on. Strictly speaking, these could also become the polar bear's food, but they ran away very quickly. It was impossible for the polar bears to catch up with these small animals on land. Moreover, in summer, the polar bear's body functions were almost stagnant. They even walked very slowly. The mosquitoes flying in the sky would bite the polar bears with a stronger body odor, causing the polar bears to be irritated and in pain. From time to time, they would roar angrily, shake their heads, and so on, trying to chase away the little things that bit them. Fortunately, Qiao Qixi and Aodisai liked to be clean. They would lick each other a few times a day. This would make the smell on their bodies very light, and they could largely avoid annoying flies and insects. Qiao Qixi could tell that Aodisai did not like to be disturbed by flies, especially when he was woken up by flies when he was sleeping. The pressure on his body would be very low. In order to solve this problem, Qiao Qixi would pay attention to the surrounding grass when she walked, hoping to find plants with mosquito-repellent effects. Grass, mint mosquito-repellent grass, anything would do. Among them, grass could be seen everywhere in the wild in the south. It grew everywhere like weeds, and it was quite difficult to find it on the coast of Greenland. Whether or not one could find it depended on luck. As mentioned before, polar bears would move very slowly in summer. They would walk about 10 kilometers a day, and 10 kilometers was just a drop in the bucket for the vast and endless coastline. This caused the geographical environment around them to not change much for a few days. The dried meat became a snack that the little polar bear would only eat when it was hungry, and Aodisai no longer wanted to be fed by him. Therefore, there was often a scene between the two of them where one of them would feed the other, and the other would feed it back to the other. The drone clearly captured the humility of the two polar bears. The emotional scene made people smile and sigh at the same time. They had such a good relationship, and they were in such a difficult situation. In the blink of an eye, the polar bears had been ashore for almost a month. The other polar bears had become thinner and were covered in dust. Although Aodisai and Yelashanda could not find any food, they were still as fair and clean as ever. Birds of a feather flock together. It seems that having the same hygiene habits is one of the conditions for becoming good friends. I really like watching the two of them. I always feel like they can fight to a perfect ending. Watching the other polar bears of summer always makes me feel like I can't bear to watch them closely. Two delicate polar bears. I hope they can take good care of themselves and don't encounter any accidents. God bless them. In the grass, Qiao Qixi was quite lucky. He saw wild mint, a kind of plant that could survive at minus 15 degrees Celsius and had a mosquito-repellent effect. The mint also had a cooling effect. The juice was cool when applied around the eyes where mosquitoes were easily attracted. Ao Daisai immediately felt much more comfortable and his mood naturally improved. Without any worries, he intimately rubbed against the little bear that brought him a cool feeling. He began to concentrate on thinking about where to find food to feed the little bear. The road ahead of them was very long and full of unknowns. The scorching sun, the wind that was no longer cool, and the sound of the waves accompanied the slow steps of the two polar bears. No one knew what would happen next. The only thing that was certain was that they would stay by each other's side and experience hunger, searching, and so on together. Without the dried meat, the small bucket was filled with mint leaves in case there was no wild mint to pick on the road. Xiao Qishi was quite used to this kind of life because he knew that his life was not in danger. The fat on his body could support him until the ice and snow came again. Ao Daisai was the same. They were lucky polar bears. Yes, every time he thought about his encounter with Ao Daisai, Xiao Qishi would be extremely grateful and happy. For example, when he was playing out the habit in his mind before going to bed, Xiao Qishi would suddenly kiss Ao Daisai on a whim. At that time, even if Ao Daisai was in a daze, he would instinctively rub against him for a moment. He would even wake up and play with him for a while before falling asleep. Ao Daisai probably felt that the little bear was too bored to sleep and needed to be coaxed. They were probably the only ones who had such leisure time in the summer. As for filling their stomachs, they would naturally wait until they had enough fun and had a good sleep before making plans. The next day, Xiao Qishi didn't know whether it was morning or afternoon. In short, he felt so hungry that he didn't want to walk anymore. He missed the taste of whale meat, the taste of seal meat, or even the chewy walrus meat. It would be best if he could have some of them. In short, it was fine as long as he could eat. Damn, he was too hungry, really. Ow, ow. The world was unfair. Where did all the food go? The little polar bear was so hungry that he suddenly fell to the ground and rolled around to vent his anger. He was unwilling to take another step forward. Ao Daisai immediately stopped and looked back at the little bear. His dark and deep eyes seemed to hide endless doting and heartache. He walked back to Xiao Qishi with his thick limbs and made a low sound. At the same time, he cupped Xiao Qishi. Oh, he was so hungry. Xiao Qishi just wanted to vent his negative energy. If he kept being positive, he felt that he would have a heart problem. Because this was a very realistic problem, okay? No one could face this kind of situation where they were hungry for several days with a smile. At the very least, they would scold someone to vent their anger or something. As for whether it would bring psychological burden to Ao Daisai, well, Xiao Qishi felt that a pure polar bear should not be affected by other polar bears spitting out black mud. Generally speaking, only environmental changes and blood relationships could have a psychological impact on animals. Of course, this was Xiao Qishi's own conclusion. There was no rigorous scientific basis for it. The chubby boy lay on the ground and observed Ao Daisai's reaction with his round eyes. Would Ao Daisai hit the child? No, the other party was still calm. The subtle emotional changes were hidden under the furry face and difficult to detect. However, after being with Ao Daisai for many days, Xiao Qishi had learned to judge the other party's mood by the changes in the other party's eyes. In the face of his shameless behavior, he guessed that Ao Daisai was probably a little helpless and heartbroken. In addition to making a low voice to comfort him, Ao Daisai also lowered its head and nuzzled his butt with its nose. The meaning of wanting him to continue walking was quite obvious. Only by moving forward could they find food. Staying here would only make them hungrier. For a polar bear with strong attack power, this gentle force was really gentle and doting, even more than the level of a mother's treatment of a cub. Some grumpy mothers in nature had limited patience with their children. Gentle doting was limited to breastfeeding. If it were a mother bear facing a 2-year-old child like Xiao Qishi, she would have broken her legs long ago. The cub, who was a few hundred pounds lying on the ground, made 2 symbolic sounds, then stopped acting crazy. He rolled up, shook his fur, and continued on his way. After an unknown amount of time, they walked tiredly to a rocky beach. On the quiet, rocky beach, deep and shallow puddles were revealed after the tide receded. Although these puddles were not attractive and had a lot of silt, there were puddles where there were fish. Aodicei was very experienced, so it knew that there were fish here. Of course, Qiaoqishi also knew. He had always been looking forward to such a geographical environment. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so hungry. The little polar bear that loved cleanliness, driven by hunger, stepped its white claws into the mud and hunted quietly. Aodicei went between the rocks where the water flow was more intense. With a clear goal, he quietly stayed on the rocks, lowered his head, and waited for an opportunity to move. His huge figure was reflected on the surface of the water. As the water flowed, his serious face was faintly discernible. When the fish flashed by in the water flow, Aodicei quickly bit down on the prey. His movements were very clean. Almost at the same time, Qiaoqishi also picked up a fish from the shallow puddle. However, he didn't bite the fish to death. The fish in his mouth shook its head and wagged its tail violently. Countless mud dots fell like rain. In an instant, they were all over his body. Qiaoqishi was stunned. He closed his eyes and stared blankly. A group of F********************** S ran through his mind. What the F*********, the appearance of an old, handsome, clean, white, and handsome. After Aodicei caught the fish, he immediately turned around to look for Qiaoqishi. Then, he saw a muddy bear with a small chest and a head full of mud dots. Aodicei was also stunned. The fish in his mouth almost fell into the water. Well, it was probably because he had never seen Qiaoqishi covered in mud before. He was a little surprised. It was too uncomfortable to be covered in mud by the fish. Qiaoqishi quickly came to the edge of the water with the fish in his mouth. He plunged into the splashing water and let the cool water wash away the mud on his body. This way, the fish would be tossed to death. It was just the right time to eat. After being hungry for a few days, Qiaoqishi saw that everyone had fish in their mouths. He happily enjoyed the fruits of his labor. However, he didn't expect that after he finished eating the fish in his mouth, Aodicei would still hold the fish in his mouth. After he finished eating, Aodicei fed the fish to his mouth seamlessly. How could this be? Qiaoqishi couldn't accept this fish no matter what. He was so touched that he shook his head and let Aodicei eat it himself. Aodicei probably didn't understand that he was rejected. In his mind, the little polar bear was in a very hungry state. One fish couldn't fill his stomach. However, he was a man who did things quickly and didn't spend much time thinking about problems. Since Qiaoqishi didn't accept this fish, he ate it quickly and went to catch the next fish. The wet little bear stared at Aodicei's back in the water as he seriously caught the fish. He had an impulse to smile in his heart. Aodicei, so easy to fool. After being emotional, Qiaoqishi got up from the water and continued to explore the shallow pool full of treasures. It was easier for him to get food there. After about 5 minutes, Aodicei caught another fish in the flowing water. It was bigger and fatter than the previous one. He stepped on the rocks dotted by the water and came to Qiaoqishi's side with nimble steps. He lowered his head and fed the fish to the little bear. This time, Qiaoqishi didn't refuse, because he felt that if he refused again, Aodicei would be very worried about him. A bear that couldn't even be fed with food was not far from death. So, he had to accept it. He also called out twice to express his gratitude. Aodicei paused and licked his mouth. No one knew what he was thinking. In short, he ate the smaller fish he caught later. He only fed the bigger fish to Qiaoqishi. For the whole afternoon, the two polar bears were fishing by the water. After eating dozens of fish, they finally felt full. Qiaoqishi was in a wet state all afternoon. Sigh. He said that he was very tired from eating this meal. Now that he was finally full, he could find a slightly flatter rock and lie down to dry his fur. Aodicei was also wet. His fur clung to his body, making him look strong and burly. His whole body exuded a strong sense of strength, which was completely different from the fat body of the little bear. He sat next to Qiao Qishi, lowered his head, and licked his paws. Then he licked the little bear next to him. In the end, he decided to lick the little bear dry first, then deal with his own problem. After so long, Qiao Qishi was already sleepy. Feeling that Ao Daisai was licking him, he threw away his shame and did a split, exposing his fragile belly. Under the camera of the drone, the little bear was lying on all fours. Its 4 black paws were very cute, and the strong Ao Daisai didn't mind at all. It put the little bear's paws into its mouth. Yilashanda was really a spoiled and spoiled little bear. It was enough to make the other polar bears envious. Chapter 19. The drones used in the polar regions did not make too much noise, and their small and exquisite size would not attract the attention of polar bears. In fact, many animals in the wild would treat the drones as birds in the sky, even if they saw them. Only the cameras on land would be played by animals in the wild. At this time, Qiao Qishi, who was lying on the rock with his legs spread and his belly exposed, enjoying Ao Daisai's licking, had his eyes closed because of the glaring sun. Therefore, he did not notice that there was a drone in the air not far above his head, quietly recording his pampered appearance. If he knew that a drone was spying on his life, Qiao Qishi would have immediately sat up, clamped his undignified fat legs, and kept a distance from Ao Daisai, refusing to indulge in extravagance. Unfortunately, he did not know. Based on the principle that if no one saw it, it would not be the truth, Qiao Qishi quietly fell, relaxed, and gave up the most basic sense of shame as a human being. Not only did he walk his bird without any pressure during the day, but he also shamelessly enjoyed Ao Daisai's licking 3 times a day and hugged him when he slept. Qiao Qishi, Aircong hand. JPG. I can explain this. The main reason was that it was really difficult to be a polar bear. He was an intelligent social animal, and in his bones, he yearned for warmth and companionship. Of course, he liked hugs and intimate relationships. Hugs were his spiritual support. Otherwise, how could he survive in this world of ice and snow? Qiao Qishi, who was becoming more and more like a bear, curled up his 2 paws, lay on the rock, and fell into a sweet dream. Unknowingly, his dream had changed from becoming an elite in the industry and bringing glory to his family to eat a full meal and then sleep well. He guessed that Ao Daisai's dream was the same. The difference was that when spring came, Ao Daisai would want a wife in addition to eating and sleeping. The water gurgled and the wind was clear. Other than the unfriendly temperature, Ao Daisai seemed to like the current tranquility. He was steady and calm, his gaze calm and wise. It was as if he was in control of everything around him and nothing could make him panic. But when she looked at the little bear she had picked up, she was gentle and doting. Ao Daisai licked the little bear that was too sleepy to open its eyes. It paid special attention to the 2 soles of its feet that had been soaked in the mud for a long time. After making sure that there were no parasites in the gaps of its paws, it was relieved. Only then would Ao Daisai lower his head to take care of his fur. Unlike how he treated the little bear, Ao Daisai was very clean and quick with himself. In the past few days, they had been searching for food, enduring hunger, and the frustration of not being able to find food to feed the little bear. They hadn't had a good night's sleep. After filling her stomach, Ao Daisai was able to sleep soundly next to the soft little bear. Of course, the temperature was still too high. The mud in the shallow puddles had a trace of warmth from the sun. The small fish trapped in the puddles had not had time to leave with the tide. If nothing unexpected happened, they would emit a rancid smell after 2 days. This was indeed the case. The tide here would not rise anymore. It would only get drier and drier. The temperature on the rocks was still too high. As the smell spread, the surrounding flies and mosquitoes also found them. Ao Daisai, who was troubled, woke up and made a low muffled sound. He shook his head to drive away the mosquitoes. Qiao Qishi woke up in such a movement. It was very uncomfortable because he also felt the unusual heat, which meant that the summer had really arrived. He was helpless. This place was bare. There were only some short grass on the shore. There wasn't even a shade to rest in. Lying in the grass was not a wise choice because there were more mosquitoes there. To put it exaggeratedly, Xiao Qishi was afraid that if he slept in the grass, he would be carried away by mosquitoes. It was so hot. The polar bear's sophisticated thermal insulation system was like a burden at this time. Xiao Qishi got up and left the rocks by the water with Ao Daisai. Although there were fish in this shallow water beach, seriously speaking, a tributary that was about to dry up was not a suitable place to stay in for a long time. They had to find a more comfortable place to rest before the hottest weather arrived. Just like that, the two polar bears, who had a plan and a goal, once again nestled together and embarked on the journey to find a beautiful home. Of course, there was also the small yellow bucket. Xiao Qishi chewed a handful of mint leaves. He was too lazy to use his claws to smear the juice. He directly licked Ao Daisai's head and face with his tongue. His saliva had special effects. Ao Daisai only felt that the place where the little polar bear licked was cool and very comfortable. This could keep him cool for a moment and drive away the mosquitoes he hated. Xiao Qishi never thought that this would form a bad habit for Ao Daisai. Every time he felt hot in the summer, Ao Daisai would stand in front of him with a big face and wait for him to lick it. However, the problem was that the other party's face was big and it took too much saliva. At this time, the other polar bears on the shore also welcomed new challenges. Life was not easy. The group of polar bears that shared the beached whales on the shore had already tasted hunger about a week ago. Unless their good luck came one after another, and they encountered new food after leaving the volcanic mud coast. But the chances were very small. There were not many geographical locations on the coast that were suitable for catching fish. Even if there were, they would be fleeting or already occupied by polar bears. Weak female bears with cubs and subadult bears that had not yet fully grown had a higher probability of encountering hunger. Polar animal researchers were paying close attention to this group of little angels who were in a difficult situation. At the right time, they would choose to lend a helping hand. Not only were Xiao Qishi and Ao Daisai being tracked, but many subadult bears and female bears with cubs had also become targets. The degree of attention people paid depended on the situation. Generally, people would pay close attention to the less optimistic animals and list them in a list of animals that needed help at any time and follow up carefully. Xiao Qishi and Ao Daisai were not in this list. The reason for their attention was very special and novel, stemming from their unusual friendship and outstanding appearance. The most handsome and white adult bear in the entire Arctic this year was undoubtedly Ao Daisai, who had just grown up. He had only been noticed this year and was a rising star. The most handsome and white adult bear was naturally Yulashanda, who was with Ao Daisai. It was said that he had a gentle and cute temper and was a kind little angel. There were also photos of Yulashanda interacting with humans at the rescue station on the Polar Enthusiast Forum. She had big, shiny eyes and white, fluffy hair. She was simply too cute. Almost everyone who had seen her photo would keep a copy of it. It was a pity that they could not come into contact with the legendary Yulashanda. The only one who could be with Yulashanda every day was the strong and handsome Ao Daisai. In the research station, the hardworking staff sorted out the data and sighed from time to time. It was obvious that they were hurt by this year's data again. The two subadult bears that followed us today are not in good condition. The young man took out a photo and discussed it with his colleague. This is a subadult male bear that just left its mother. The drone took a picture of it on the barren shore. It was walking and suddenly fell down. The colleague took a look and saw a thin subadult bear that was about 3 years old. Look at this skeleton. Is it a female? No, it's a male. This. The colleague who got the answer sighed softly and could not help but make a comparison. Even a 2-year-old Yulashanda looks stronger than this. How can this be compared? The young man shook his head. That's true. The colleague sighed. Yulashanda's life was comparable to a life of luxury. No other polar bear of the same age had a better life than him. Are you done sorting? The colleague patted him on the shoulder. Let's go and get off work. Let's eat delicacies to relieve our hurt feelings. Okay. The young man smiled and said, while we're eating, play the video of Yulashanda and Ao Daisai today. I won't be worried when I see them. Ha! Don't forget, Yolashanda has been hungry for a few days too. The colleague said. Yes, but he's fat. A mischievous voice said. Ha, that's true. The two people who went to eat with their arms around each other's shoulders laughed. Of course, when they reached the place, they would not forget to share today's Yolashanda and Ao Daisai with everyone. The tough life in the Arctic, the cruel natural environment, everything seemed very depressing. Gradually, these two little angels who lived a good life became the comforters in everyone's hearts. As long as they saw that they were still alive and healthy and loved each other, everyone felt sweet and warm in their hearts. This way, the injuries they suffered from other polar bears could also be comforted and healed. In this cruel summer, if there was a miracle that was born, it must be the great friendship between Ao Daisai and Yolashanda. After leaving Shallow Water Beach, they walked for 2 days and were hungry again. However, Xiao Qishi did not regret it at all. He guessed that Shallow Water Beach was almost dry by now. Sooner or later, they would have to leave. It was better to leave early. Ao Daisai was also hungry, but he looked no different from usual. He was still calm and hurried on with a clear route. As a newbie, Xiao Qishi did not have a say in where she should go, and he could only be a follower. Last time, the little bear was so hungry that he rolled on the ground and made a scene. This time, Ao Daisai seemed to be very considerate. Before he rolled on the ground, he coaxed him first. Two hungry and bitter polar bears were rolling and playing on the grass next to a bush, venting their negative emotions about the hard life. However, this kind of play was extremely unfair to Xiao Qishi. The big polar bear could bite the little polar bear's entire head. Xiao Qishi, get lost. Don't you know that men have 2 heads that can't be touched? He was so hungry that he did not have the strength to behave atrociously. He really wanted to tell Ao Daisai that he was tired and did not want to play with him. Ao Daisai, who was the one playing with whom? There were bushes, which meant that there might be ripe berries in the forest that could be picked. Berries were a good source of nutrition in the summer. Xiao Qishi sniffed carefully. There was indeed a sweet smell in the air, which stimulated his taste buds. He could not help but swallow his saliva. He left Ao Daisai and explored the sweet smell greedily. Fortunately, Ao Daisai's temper had always been good in front of the little bear, so he did not care about being ignored. Since the little bear did not go far, Ao Daisai could still see his chubby back from where he was lying on the ground, so he opened his eyes a little to get some fresh air. However, Ao Daisai did not take a nap for more than 2 minutes before he heard a howl. It was the little bear. He was not awake yet, so he followed his instincts and went to find him. Only by experiencing the most bitter of hardships can one become a bear. In the bushes, Xiao Qishi finally escaped with a piece of honey in her mouth after a fierce battle where she was chased by dozens of bees. Honey was so delicious, so sweet and delicious. When he saw Ao Daisai, he quickly handed him a piece excitedly. Look, honey, it's nourishing and nutritious. There's nothing wrong with having some honey to nourish the body during the tough summer. It was just that his left cheek was stung by a bee just now, so he felt a little strange. Chapter 20. Xiao Qishi's feeling was correct. His face was more than a little wrong. If it continued like this, it would be asymmetrical. But this was a story for later. At present, the attention of the 2 polar bears was on the freshly baked piece of golden honey. The honey, it was the favorite of bears. In fact, polar bears were originally grizzly bears on land and slowly evolved. Their nature of liking honey was as strong as that of most bears on land. Even Ao Daisai liked to eat honey. When he smelled the rich and sweet smell of the honey piece, he licked his mouth and leaned his nose over to carefully take a bite of the rare sweet. Xiao Qishi was so happy that she turned in a circle, eagerly waiting for Ao Daisai's feedback. Her round eyes seemed to say, "How is it? Is it delicious?" Honey is the best. It seemed that when he was a human, he didn't realize that honey was so delicious. Could it be that the wild honey in Greenland was of better quality? Perhaps. The honey on the domestic market had been brewed through countless processes and had lost its original taste. It was indeed not as original as it used to be. Of course, honey was delicious. Even A.O. Daisai couldn't resist the temptation. However, he didn't eat it after taking a small bite. This was the food of the little polar bear. He pushed it back to Qiao Qishi to eat it herself. Here it comes, here it comes. The bad habit of being modest is back again. Qiao Qishi really couldn't do anything about this polar bear that loved her to the bone. Oh no, there was a way. Qiao Qishi first bit the honey piece and smeared her mouth with it. Then, she leaned over and smeared A.O. Daisai's mouth with it. This way, A.O. Daisai had to stick out his tongue to clean it up and then taste the sweet taste. I'm really a genius. Qiao Qishi used such a roundabout way to share this delicious honey with A.O. Daisai. The two of them licked each other's mouths. This unsightly and immoral scene was first recorded on the camera. Of course, people wouldn't think that two wild polar bears were kissing sweetly. As the saying goes, everything happens for a reason. After the joint efforts of all the colleagues in the office, they finally came to the conclusion that the two polar bears were eating honey. As for why such a pure piece of honey would have such an ambiguous and charming appearance, it was still an unknown mystery for the time being. Only the two polar bears knew about it. Summer, sharing honey. Oh, the picture is so beautiful. Those who watched felt their hearts soften. They actually found honey in the hungry summer. That's great. I feel so sweet in my heart. Honey, honey, honey. Nothing makes bears happier than honey. Ha ha. Today's A.O. Daisai and Yulashanda are sweet too. How nice. Although all the bears are hungry, I don't know why, but when I see A.O. Daisai and Yulashanda, I feel relaxed. Wow, eating honey is so blissful. The scene of the two bears biting each other's cheeks was not only posted on the forum for thousands of people to watch, but it was also seen by a female polar bear in the distance. There were relatively more polar bears living on this continent than in other places. After all, even the island emblem was a polar bear. It could be seen that the polar bear was the symbol of Greenland. It was not surprising to encounter other polar bears on the way, but the identity of this female polar bear was slightly special. She was not an ordinary polar bear. She was A.O. Daisai's mother. After leaving A.O. Daisai 2 years ago, she was still young and strong. In the next spring, she met the male she liked. Unsurprisingly, she became pregnant again and became a mother for the second time. Unlike the first litter, the mother bear gave birth to 2 little bear babies, but only one survived. The female polar bear was about 1 year old and looked very cute. Like most polar bears that came ashore for the summer, in this harsh season, the mother and daughter pair, who had been trekking for a long time, looked a little tired and thin. The sensitive female bear smelled the sweet smell of honey in the air and also smelled the scent of a strong male polar bear. This was originally a sign that she needed to be vigilant and uneasy, but this smell was still fresh in the female bear's memory. She still remembered that this was one of her first litters of children. That's right, Qiao Qishi guessed right. A.O. Daisai did have other siblings, and there were 2 of them. The valiant mother bear raised 3 children in her first litter. It was very difficult and could be said to be a miracle. Among them, A.O. Daisai was the strongest and had a stable personality. Yes, he had a smart personality that his other siblings did not have. He had always been very independent, so he left his mother's side early and started his own life. Later, the 4 blood-related polar bears were scattered around the polar region and never met each other again. This was also normal because the entire polar region was very vast and unimaginable, and the number of polar bears was only about 20,000. The probability of the 4 of them reuniting was too small. Until now, the mother bear, who had reproduced the second litter of cubs, led the only surviving little bear and unexpectedly met her previous litter of children on the road. It was still fresh in her memory. Compared to the Arctic 4 or 5 years ago, the current environment was worse. The valiant mother bear was able to raise 3 children alone 4 or 5 years ago, but 4 or 5 years later, she, who had experience, could only take care of 1 older child. In addition to luck and other unavoidable factors, it had to be said that this was caused by the environment. The mother bear, who led the little bear, stopped and did not turn around to leave. She was sure that Aodicei would not attack them, but she did not rush forward because the scene in front of her made her confused. The smell was right, and so was her memory. Mother Bear remembered that the child who left her first was a male, not a female, but now she was confused. The child was leading a little bear, who was also a male. Was he hunting? No. Mother Bear clearly saw her child licking the face of the underage male. This was a very intimate action. Even if the basic force was 100 times stronger, it would not reach the level of hunting. Mother Bear was very confused. After licking the sweet honey crumbs on each other's faces, the two satisfied bears finally had the mind to pay attention to the situation around them. Aodicei had already noticed the appearance of a mother bear with a cub. Because of the familiar smell, he was not vigilant. Other than that, he did not have any other thoughts, even if the other party was his mother. This was Aodicei's personality. He was not clingy to his mother. He was the first to be weaned and the first to leave the group. Xiao Qishi also noticed the mother bear. Oh, he realized that he was lucky to always meet little bear cubs. Look, now there was another one. It was a rather delicate and good-looking only cub. Since they were all underage bears, he did not have the ability to distinguish whether the other party was a female or a male from the smell. Only the experienced mother bear could do that. Actually, it had been a long time since he met a strange bear. In Xiao Qishi's memory, the last bear he met was still fat. This time, the bear he met was already a little thin and tired. That's normal. After all, summer has truly arrived. Perhaps this is what they are like now, Fatty Qiao thought without any self-awareness. After exchanging a few glances with the mother bear in the air, Aodicei was the first to look away. Then, it led Xiao Qishi forward. Aya, so what if they met many cute bear cubs? They were still untouchable. Forget it, forget it. Xiao Qishi looked away with some regret. Then, he twisted his big white butt and turned to follow Aodicei's footsteps with the empty yellow bucket on his head. In the beginning, Xiao Qishi, who was in a good mood, walked very briskly and hummed a tuneless tune. Later, as he walked, he felt his left cheek become more and more numb. It was so serious that even his eyes were affected. He touched it with his paw in surprise. The little polar bear felt that there was an extra patch on his face. To be precise, it was swollen. His left eye was affected and narrowed into a slit. Xiao Qishi cried out in pain. Aodicei turned back and stopped to look at the little bear. He was a little confused. In the end, he stood up and took off the small bucket on Xiao Qishi's head. He carefully examined Xiao Qishi's swollen face. Ooh! Xiao Qishi cried to Aodicei, his big eyes misty. Some polar bears, such as Aodicei, might never experience swelling after being stung by bees in their entire lives. What's wrong? However, from little bear's groans, Aodicei probably knew that the other party was feeling very uncomfortable, so he lowered his head and licked the tip of little bear's nose. Other than that, Aodicei didn't know how to comfort him. Perhaps a full meal could solve this problem. The place where they could get food was not far away. Aodicei had already smelled the smell of a special environment. It was a fishy smell mixed with the smell of various animals. Aodicei helped little bear continue to move forward with the plastic bucket in his mouth. Since Xiao Qishi could not get any consolation from her fake crying, what else was there to cry about? As he put away his Oscar-worthy acting skills, he looked back curiously. It seemed that the mother and son pair hadn't gone far. It wasn't that they were following them. It was just that everyone had the same goal, and it was on the way. This was very good. In fact, as a bear who loved to be lively, Xiao Qishi very much welcomed good-natured polar bears to be their neighbors. The premise was that they didn't fight. Fighting would hurt harmony. Then, Xiao Qishi realized that his worries didn't exist. When they, or to be precise, when the little polar bear couldn't stand the fatigue and stopped to rest, the mother and son pair were still on their way and swaggered past them. The mother bear even stared at him a few times before looking away. What's going on? Being handsome would attract the attention of bears. Even the mother bear would fall in love with him. It's a pity that I'm still an underage domestic bear. I don't like to be in a relationship with a younger brother. Xiao Qishi thought to himself. With half of his swollen face, he hid in Ao Daisai's arms. This hiding hit a sore spot. Thus, Xiao Qishi finally understood. Perhaps the mother bear wasn't staring at his handsome white face, but his swollen pig face. Annoying. They rested in place for a while, then got up and continued on their way. They walked quite fast, so they quickly overtook the mother and son pair in front of them. This was a must. Oh no, the top student from a famous school finally found a blind spot. This didn't make sense. First, why didn't this mother bear with her cub avoid Ao Daisai? Second, why didn't Ao Daisai, who had always been very concerned about his safety, avoid this mother bear? You overtake me, I overtake you. Taste carefully. Next, something happened that made Xiao Qishi's imagination run wild. When Ao Daisai overtook the mother and son pair, the mother bear suddenly stretched out her neck and sniffed Ao Daisai's butt. This, as everyone knew, sniffing butts in the animal world was a very hooligan move. It was very directional and very strong. What was there to doubt about love? Other than the need for reproduction, Xiao Qishi couldn't think of anything else. Also, he would never have dreamed that the mother bear just wanted to confirm if there was something wrong with her nose. Did she remember the wrong gender of the child? It turned out that she didn't remember wrongly. As for why a male polar bear would raise a baby polar bear, such a complicated question was something that even a scientific genius with an IQ as high as 200 couldn't understand, let alone a female polar bear with an IQ as high as 200. It was too rare. After witnessing this scene, Xiao Qishi, who was good at screenwriting, began to play a 100-episode romantic idol drama in his mind. On the barren and difficult road, the single mother, who had been tortured by life, fell in love at first sight with the handsome single father. The steady brother with a child. The next episode, screenwriter Xiao carefully observed Ao Daisai's reaction. Well, Ao Daisai didn't have any special reaction. Although it didn't walk around the single mother, it didn't look at her either. It was as if she was there. That's right, Ao Daisai wasn't an adult yet, so his thoughts were very serious. He was still a teenager. It was too unlucky. Xiao Qishi, poor thing, meeting the right bear at the wrong time. As he walked, Ao Daisai seemed to realize that something was wrong. The little polar bear, which should have been following him, seemed to be attracted by something else. Yes, he turned around and saw that his little bear, who had forgotten the pain after the scar healed, was looking at the mother bear with great interest. But the mother bear with the cub wasn't very gentle. She lowered her head and scolded the unfamiliar little polar bear. She didn't mean any harm, but as a mother, she habitually warned the cub to stay away from her. Ao Daisai didn't let it go. He put down the small bucket in his mouth and came over to negotiate with the mother bear. There was a smack like the sound of plastic hitting stone, little yellow. Xiao Qishi's hair suddenly stood on end. He quickly put aside all his curiosity and went to rescue his little bucket. If anything happened to little yellow, he wouldn't let Ao Daisai off. The author has something to say. Many friends said that they have school tomorrow and want to update in advance. So let's be happy and publish 3 chapters at once. Chapter 21. Scars were a man's medal, but the little polar bear didn't want Goldie to get hurt. Fortunately, the plastic bucket was thick and tough. It wasn't damaged by Ao Daisai's rudeness. Xiao Qishi hugged the bucket and heaved a sigh of relief. However, his worried heart immediately jumped to his throat. He saw that the atmosphere between Ao Daisai and the single mother had become tense. Xiao Qishi didn't understand. Why did the situation change so quickly? Was it because of Mama Bear's roar just now? Seriously, Xiao Qishi sighed. They were both adult bears with children. Couldn't they be more mature? Could they be more mature? No matter what, he was a conflicted person. Xiao Qishi ran over. He first placed his Goldie outside the battle circle before running over. On the other side, Ao Daisai and Mama Bear held their heads high. They looked at each other and roared at different frequencies from their throats. It sounded like they were quarreling. In fact, it was a form of communication. Ao Daisai was defending his dignity and warning Mama Bear not to do what she did just now. Otherwise, he wouldn't be polite. Mama Bear might have received his warning, but she didn't want to be outdone. She would also do her best to defend her line of defense. There was no room for discussion. This was undoubtedly a form of provocation. As powerful as Ao Daisai was, if the female polar bear in front of him wasn't his mother, he might have already used violence. The truth was that they were related by blood. Other than a threatening growl, Ao Daisai wouldn't do anything for the time being. However, just these deafening roars were enough to make one's eardrums vibrate and feel dizzy. What's more, two polar bears were roaring at each other. The effect was even more remarkable. It was as if two pairs of loudspeakers were turned on. Xiao Qishi trembled as he looked at the little bear. He realized that although it was hiding behind Mama Bear, it was very calm, as if it was used to this. Since the little polar bear that was a size smaller than him was as calm as an old dog, how could he have the face to tremble? Xiao Qishi immediately redefined his role. He rubbed his head against the mother bear's Ao Daisai and let out two soft cries to persuade Ao Daisai to forget about it. It was enough to teach it a lesson. Was she really going to argue with a single mother? The little bear's coquettishness instantly pulled Ao Daisai's attention back. He immediately stopped yelling at the mother bear and lowered his head to look at the little bear that had just been scolded. It was as if he had changed his voice into a gentle and low voice. The change was seamless, and the mother bear and her cubs were probably stunned when they heard it. Needless to say, Xiao Qishi was already used to this. It would be strange if Ao Daisai was fierce to him. It was nothing. He licked Otis's handsome face. Oh, this action used to be effortless, but now that half of his face was swollen, it hurt when he touched the swollen area. He groaned when it hurt. When he groaned, Ao Daisai's heart ached. Ao Daisai's heart ached, so he didn't have time to care about Mama Bear and Sister Bear. Even though this wasn't Xiao Qishi's original intention, she had managed to achieve her goal by accident. She had done it beautifully. Mama Bear and Little Sister Bear were indeed confused. The two polar bears stared blankly at Otis licking the male polar bear cub beside him. Otis's actions were extremely gentle, and he was trying his best to suppress his voice. Was this still the powerful and angry male polar bear from before? The bears couldn't believe it. The scene filled with the smell of gunpowder mysteriously dissipated and was replaced by a warm scene in front of them. Ao Daisai comforted the little bear whose face was swollen from being stung by honey. He used all his gentleness until the little bear stopped groaning in pain. He was relieved and finally remembered his hunting plan. He led the little bear and continued to walk forward. After the danger, just now, Xiao Qishi decided to hold the small bucket himself, because it would be uncomfortable to hold the bucket with his swollen face, so it was better to hold it in his mouth. Before he followed Ao Daisai's footsteps, he daringly looked at Mama Bear and Little Bear again. It was a pity. If only he could communicate with them. He wanted to invite them to travel together. This atypical little polar bear suddenly babbled at Mama Bear and Little Sister Bear with the mentality of giving a try. Then it ran away. In fact, even if Xiao Qishi didn't do this, they would still travel together. Mama Bear's destination was the same as Ao Daisai's. They were both looking for a place where they could hunt. This was the goal of all polar bears, but the direction they chose was different. In this regard, they were indeed mother and son. Many of their behaviors were indeed traceable. Xiao Qishi looked back and found that the single mother was still following behind. He was happy, since the other party could get along peacefully with Ao Daisai. To a large extent, he could avoid some danger by following them. For the rest of the journey, too big and too small, the four polar bears traveled together. The drone took an aerial photo of the unusual negotiation process between the two adult polar bears that happened to encounter each other. It inevitably gave rise to a desire to explore. Why was Ao Daisai willing to travel with a female bear? Was the female bear another Yulishanda? No, it should be impossible. If one analyzed and compared it carefully, one would find that Ao Daisai treated the female bear with a disregard attitude. It didn't even treat Yulishanda well, so the female bear couldn't be another Yulishanda. Another possibility was that they might be related to each other. People speculated about their relationship and felt that the most likely possibility was that they were related to each other. This seemed to be the only explanation. It was roughly estimated that it would take about 2 days to reach the hunting destination that Ao Daisai had set his sights on. They were all hungry, especially the mother bear and her cub. They had been very tired these few days. Fortunately, there were still 2 days of travel left, which was still within a tolerable range. Endurance and calmness were the first lessons that mother polar bears taught their children, because these were important qualities that they relied on to survive. There was almost no other way. Xiao Qixi, almost thousands of polar bears, shut up. In a short 2 days on the road, the 4 polar bears split into groups of 2 and each did their own thing. They tacitly kept a safe distance and took care of their own children. Perhaps for the mother bear and her cub, this trip was just a simple encounter in nature. For Xiao Qixi, they had already formed a deep revolutionary friendship. Yes, in another 2 days, little bear and little bear would be able to play together. How should he put it? The little polar bear was lying on its mother bear's back, shaking its little feet and taking a nap. It was really cute. It was like the clouds in the sky, but also like sweet cotton candy. If only he could touch it, hug it, and kiss it. How nice would that be? Every time he saw the little polar bear, Xiao Qixi had the same thought. When Xiao Qixi was sleeping, he poked his head out of Ao Daisai's arms and laid on Ao Daisai's mountain-like body, peeping at the little polar bear family behind them. He suddenly thought of those unattainable dreams that Ao Daisai enjoyed every day. He touched, kissed, and hugged Otis. He even touched Otis's feet and indescribable body parts. The more the little polar bear thought about it, the angrier it got. It bit Otis's back. Ao Daisai was taking a nap and had not yet lost consciousness. He was watching over the child, and he did not expect to be bitten. Although he was a little puzzled, Ao Daisai was not angry. According to his simple logical way of thinking, he might think that Xiao Qixi was hungry. After a while, Ao Daisai raised his paw to get the little guy off his body, and then pulled him into his arms, hugged him tightly, and even pressed his chin on him. In this way, only the little polar bear's nose, which needed to breathe, was still exposed. No, there was also the extra face. In the face of a terrible predicament that was comparable to the pressure of Mount Tai, Xiao Qixi felt that it was ridiculous. Since the hot summer, Ao Daisai had not pressed him asleep like this for a long time. It was no different from holding a small heater. The existence of the mother bear today aroused Ao Daisai's vigilance. In order to prevent the little polar bear from running around while he was asleep, he put Ao Daisai down. He simply pressed Xiao Qixi down. Helpless and helpless, Xiao Qixi's undying desire to stroke the little bear was instantly extinguished by Ao Daisai, and he did not even have the chance to move. It was probably only at times like this that Xiao Qixi would have the mood to sigh about the sadness of living under someone else's roof. But then again, Xiao Qixi would probably choose to be sad without hesitation between running away from home with a backbone and continuing to be sad without a backbone. During the polar day, when there was no night, polar bears still had to sleep for more than 5 hours a day. This was their habit. Sleep was also an effective way to eliminate fatigue and replenish energy. If they were injured, they could also nourish their injuries through sleep. Xiao Qixi's face was a little swollen on the first day, and very swollen on the second day. On the third day, which was the day they arrived at the hunting site, the swelling began to slowly subside. That was great. Xiao Qixi was already impatient to continue jumping around with this pig-headed face. Not only did this delay his daily life, but also prevented him from hooking up with the little bear cub. In other words, the bay where they could catch prey was a considerable tributary. The riverbed was not deep, and the light blue seawater was warmer than the deep sea under the sunlight. Beluga whales with cubs especially liked to gather here, and there were a lot of them. When photos of this tributary were taken from the air, the figures of the beluga whales could be clearly seen. Patients with trypophobia would even be resistant to photos. The number of beluga whales was considerable, but it did not mean that they were easy to catch. The polar bear had been hungry for a while, and it still needed some luck to catch a beluga whale that could relieve its hunger crisis. The mother polar bear had rich experience. In the face of prey that was close at hand, it appeared to be calm and rational. Perhaps it knew that it was useless to be excited. There was still a hard battle to fight. A moment later, the mother bear found a rock on the sea that was suitable for hunting. She lay quietly on it, quietly waiting for an opportunity. The 1-year-old polar bear cub waited on the shore a little cautiously. Even if Ao Daisai nearby did not pay attention to it, Ao Daisai's powerful aura still made it feel timid and uneasy. Ao Daisai, who was observing the sea, led Xiao Qishi deeper into the tributary and missed the hunting spot with the mother bear. The tall polar bear silently stepped on the rock by the water. The little polar bear behind him also stretched out its small feet to test the waters. However, the further they went, the deeper the sea became. Thus, he could only wait in the shallow water and watch Ao Daisai's back. Every time Ao Daisai hunted, Xiao Qishi felt that Ao Daisai was extremely handsome. He was mysterious and handsome. That kind of patience, calmness, strategizing, and decisiveness in the final blow made people unable to look away. If Ao Daisai was a human, he would definitely be a tall and handsome man with a reserved and reliable temperament. Xiao Qishi felt that. In the sea that was not cold in summer, the reef under Ao Daisai's paw was not very deep. The sea level was almost above his chest. For the next 20 minutes, he did not move. He just squatted in the middle of the sea and waited for an opportunity. Occasionally, he would wrinkle his nose and sniff the enemy. Speaking of which, Ao Daisai's hunting method was also taught by the mother bear. However, his male identity gave him better talent and conditions when it came to hunting. Compared to the mother bear upstream, Ao Daisai caught food faster. The mouth-watering smell of blood spread on the turbulent sea and startled a group of sea creatures nearby. The giant polar bear, with a fierce look on its face, used its absolute strength to drag the white whale from the deep water back to the shore. This time, Xiao Qishi witnessed the entire process of Ao Daisai's hunting at close range. However, he still felt that it was incredible and difficult to replicate. Such a big white whale. It needed to be fast and accurate. It was a little difficult. Ao Daisai put the food on the shore and shared it with the little bear. As the main foraging force, he was very generous. Before tearing the prey apart, he shook the water stains on his body and blew out a cloud of white mist from his nose. His face was wet, but he still looked very sexy and handsome. However, Ao Daisai probably did not have such self-awareness. Xiao Qishi looked at Ao Daisai, who had just returned from hunting, with concern. While checking the other party's condition, he snorted in his heart. In a few months, this powerful and handsome male polar bear would be the youth of a lucky female bear. While thinking about this happily, Xiao Qishi squatted on the ground obediently and looked up at Ao Daisai with big appreciative eyes. In his heart, he was fantasizing happily. Ao Daisai's today was his tomorrow. He wiped the Ao Daisai on his face with his paw, lowered his head, and looked deeply into the eyes of the infatuated little bear. Then his handsome face moved closer. He stuck out his pink tongue and began to lick Xiao Qishi without saying a word. Ah, the little polar bear screamed in his heart. Don't lick the left side, it hurts. Xiao Qishi reflexively turned his right face and was licked again. No, there was no water on his face. Why would Ao Daisai lick an innocent him? Ao Daisai, stop. Didn't you realize that you were licking the wrong person? He wanted to say something, but Ao Daisai ignored his bear talk. Xiao Qishi sighed. First, he stabilized his lower body. He didn't want to fall because of Ao Daisai's lick. When this crazy handsome bear finally diverted his attention and took care of his dripping sexy face, he laid on the prey and began to eat. He thought that he could do the small work of tearing open the belly of the prey, who knew that Ao Daisai would quickly squeeze over. The other party attacked him from behind and tore the white whale into several pieces. The most tender belly meat was still for him to eat. It was very domineering and barbaric. He had to eat it even if he didn't want to. Xiao Qixi wanted to say, Ao Daisai, you can use this trick to dote on your wife in the future. I promise with my bear status that all the female polar bears in the Arctic will love you to death. However, you can't treat a free and uninhibited bear like this. Ahem. Simply put, it's an innocent little bear who doesn't like to eat fat. The author has something to say. Chow chow. Have some shame, W. Chapter 22. The picky little bear should be thankful that polar bears don't have an echolocation system that can communicate with each other like killer whales and dolphins. Otherwise, every sentence he said in his heart at the moment, I don't want to eat fat meat, would spread throughout the Arctic, and he would be famous. Of course, Xiao Qixi knows the benefits of eating more fat, so he hopes that Ao Daisai can eat more. It doesn't matter. He also needs to replenish more fat. At present, the backbone of the family is still Ao Daisai, so there is nothing wrong with the food distribution. Oh, a family of bears doesn't talk like two families. If you are brothers, then you should swallow this piece of fat meat. The little polar bear took the fat meat that he didn't like to eat to Ao Daisai's mouth and forced it to feed him. On this earth, only the stomachs of human beings have bad intentions. The polar bears in the Arctic are as pure as a piece of white paper. How can they think of little bear's actions in a bad way? What Ao Daisai felt was very simple. The little polar bear gave the good meat to him to eat. After repeatedly refusing, Ao Daisai finally ate the fat meat that Xiao Qixi fed him. The rich fat tasted very good for him. After enjoying it, Ao Daisai looked at Xiao Qixi with deep and focused eyes. His beautiful big eyes seemed to be able to speak, flashing a fragmented galaxy that made Xiao Qixi intoxicated. Ao Daisai is undoubtedly good-looking. Xiao Qixi appreciates him very much. Seeing this, he also squinted his eyes and looked back with a smile. There's another reason for his happiness. Aha! He secretly fed all the fat meat to Ao Daisai. He likes the rest of the lean meat very much. Gradually, Ao Daisai seems to have realized that he accidentally ate all the limited fat in little bear's attentiveness and smile. The little polar bear can only eat lean meat that is less tasty and nutritious. He is very annoyed and rubbed the other side of his face that is not injured. Xiao Qixi smacked the meat and sighed. He didn't say this, but Ao Daisai is so childish. He has to be intimate with me 3,000 times just to eat a meal. Alas, the happy little bear has already eaten meat. The little bear of the ordinary polar bear family is still waiting for his mother to return from hunting on the shore. The smell of blood nearby seems to make the little female bear even hungrier. Otherwise, she wouldn't have overcome her fear of Ao Daisai and couldn't help but approach and watch. Xiao Qixi looks at the little bear that is crawling step by step. His heart softened as if he can already hear the other side's gulping sound. Compared with Xiao Qixi's figure, such a small bear's tea looks. Only its eyes were still so big and bright. It was still a cute little creature. Will its approach cause Ao Daisai to resist? Xiao Qixi is extremely worried at this moment. He has already decided that if Ao Daisai shows signs of eating the little bear, he will bravely stand up and sacrifice himself to save the little bear. Fortunately, Ao Daisai's attitude towards the little bear seems to be okay. It just raised its eyelids to take a look and didn't lose its temper. Xiao Qixi is not surprised by this result. It seems that he has already expected it. If Ao Daisai hates the little bear, they won't travel together. The domineering and fierce Ao Daisai won't allow a strange polar bear to share the hunting ground with it. Since the other party can move around under Ao Daisai's nose, well, Xiao Qixi boldly believes that Ao Daisai has a good impression of the mother bear and the bear cubs. At least, it won't hurt them. The two bears ate the remaining bits of meat and were satisfied. Xiao Qixi licked his paws in satisfaction and thought to himself, do I dare to do something big, such as feeding the bear cubs? He dared. No, he didn't dare. The mother bear looks so fierce. If it wasn't for Xiao Qixi's gossip, he felt that the mother bear's little bear was too pitiful. Xiao Qixi saw it clearly along the way. This mother doesn't dote on her cubs half as much as Ao Daisai, a male. 3 points at most. To put bluntly, the little bear is so pitiful. Xiao Qixi thought about it for a long time. In the end, he couldn't bear it. He resolutely used a small yellow bucket to collect the leftover meat from himself and Ao Daisai and gave it to the little bear next door to eat. The clever little bear next door hid when it saw Xiao Qixi coming over. It waited until Xiao Qixi left before it came up to eat the meat. From the way it wolfed down the food, it was obvious that it had been hungry for a few days. It didn't even stop to rest. Speaking of which, Xiao Qixi generously gave the meat. He was worried that Ao Daisai would overreact, so he used his tall body to block in front of Ao Daisai. If Ao Daisai got angry, he would act coquettishly. The other party is still a child, the future flower of the Arctic bear world. Besides, saving a bear's life is better than building a 7-story pagoda. A bear should do more good deeds in its life. Who knows, it might be reincarnated into a good family in its next life. Xiao Qixi leaned against Ao Daisai, who was cleaning its claws, and clung to the other party's thigh like a thief. He used his hundreds of kilograms body to act as a stumbling block at any time. That was indeed what he was thinking. In his next life, he shouldn't be a polar bear. It would be good to be a tree by the roadside or a small animal in the zoo. Small animals in the slaughterhouse could be avoided. He couldn't be a human either. Xiao Qixi rubbed against Ao Daisai with the laziness and sleepiness unique after a full meal. He thought to himself, "Dear Ao Daisai, let me tell you, being a human is very, very tiring. If you have a choice, don't be a human." I go to kindergarten at the age of 3, studying for 10 years, taking the exam, buying a car, buying a house, and getting a wife. You can't make any mistakes. It's even more tiring than a polar bear. As he thought about it, Xiao Qixi tilted his head and fell asleep. The little bear, who was hugging his thigh, slid down his soft body. Ao Daisai reached out his arm at the right time to grab him. Then he lay down very naturally, hugged the little bear, and licked the left side of his face in one go. At this moment, the mother bear upstream also opened for business. She came to the shore downstream with her prey in her mouth and found her child. She found that the child had already eaten the meat shared by the kind bear. Such a rare situation undoubtedly made the mother bear a little puzzled, but she didn't think too much about it. After all, she still had memories of Ao Daisai. Sharing food only existed between parents and children. Therefore, the mother bear never understood why the male polar bear she gave birth to a little polar bear. Even so, she accepted this fact. She crawled down and tore open the stomach of her prey. This female polar bear habitually ate eating fat. This was her nature. This was because she had to maintain enough nutrition and energy. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to survive, and neither would the little bear. Xiao Qixi was right. Mother bear didn't spoil the little bear. Usually, when the little bear was about 1 year old, she would let it bite its own prey, learn how to hunt and fight. In short, Mother bear would teach the little bear all kinds of survival skills in a limited time, and then chase them away. This proved that motherhood had a time limit. Mother bear's love for the little bear would slowly fade over time. This was a nature that was written in the genes. Mother bear, who was 70% full, looked up at the shade of a nearby tree. It was one of her last children, who was now a strong and mighty adult bear. This wasn't the main point. The main point was that the little bear in the other party's arms looked to be a little over 2 years old. Strictly speaking, it was already at the age of leaving the nest. The confused mother bear was probably thinking, why is it still so clingy when it's already so big? She didn't know when Ao Daisai would chase the other party away. The little bear, who was sleeping, suddenly felt a chill on his head. So he quickly turned his head and buried himself deep in Ao Daisai's arms. After being hungry and tired for a few days, they finally filled their stomachs. They needed a long and beautiful sleep to make up for the loss of their mental and physical health. Polar bears, like humans, needed more than 7 or 8 hours of sleep a day. After a comfortable environment and no longer worrying about food, the polar bears relaxed and fell into a deep sleep. The gloomy summer situation of the polar animals had been flooding the forums for a while, and every update was shocking. Even though the protection agency had worked very hard and kept working, there were still some accidents. The unnatural decline in the number of polar bears was inevitable. People wanted to say that they had done their best, but they really didn't have the confidence to say this with a clear conscience. What should be done? What could be done was still not done well. People's environmental awareness was still too weak. It was still a huge project to increase the importance of the natural environment for a population of 7 billion people. Hashtag AO Daisai's family and new neighbors hashtag the original poster, who often posted AO Daisai and Yulashanda, posted a very healing picture. The polar bears were sleeping in groups of 2, keeping a safe distance from each other. They had become veritable neighbors in their new permanent residence. This confirmed the speculation that they were related by blood. Not bad, not bad. The polar bears have finally found a suitable bay for hunting after a long journey. Now they can rest assured and fatten up. AO Daisai has finally found a place to settle down. Yulashanda is hungry and thin. Her movements are funny. New neighbors. Does this indirectly mean that AO Daisai and Yulashanda are really friendly? They actually accepted other polar bears to share their hunting grounds. That mother bear also has a little bear cub. It doesn't make sense to say that opposites attract. I can only say that AO Daisai is really not an ordinary bear. Ha ha! I really want to send him a good bear card. Dear netizens, don't make wild guesses. The original poster said that they might be related by blood. Besides, aren't we AO Daisai gay? AO Daisai. I don't believe rumors. I don't spread rumors. It's just a rare single father. How did you guys spread the rumor that it's gay? Seriously, I just want to ask AO Daisai, is it hot to hug a small stove on such a hot day? I just want to ask you, Lashanda, isn't it embarrassing to hug a parent to sleep when you're already so big? Oh my God, your focus is all skewed to Siberia. Am I the only one who's happy for you, Lashanda? He finally has a friend. Upstairs, you're thinking too much. It's impossible for polar bears from different mothers to play together. My focus is also skewed. Speaking of which, what about seniority? If that mother bear is really AO Daisai's mother, does Yulashanda have to call that little bear uncle or aunt? Sai, I always have to explain that Yulashanda is AO Daisai's younger brother, not his son, okay? Yes, they're not related by blood. Yulashanda has to respect AO Daisai. He can ignore all the polar bears in the North Pole. There's no need to call him uncle or aunt. This is the best joke I've heard this year. Yulashanda respects AO Daisai. Ha ha ha. It's good enough that the mischievous Yulashanda doesn't torment AO Daisai. I feel that Yulashanda has super good luck and affinity. No one can starve him. Ha ha. Even if it's not AO Daisai, there will be other big bosses who love and pamper him. Upstairs, be careful of being hunted down by AO Daisai. Yulashanda can only be his. Yes, you want to steal a sack from Yulashanda. What color sack does Yulashanda like? Ask Otis to help you ask. He will also chop your head off while he's at it. The analysis of the netizens on the forum was right. These 4 lucky polar bears would live peacefully on the shore and treat this place as their temporary home for the summer. Think about it. A bay with beluga whales and shade on the shore. It was undoubtedly an ideal summer resort. The mother polar bear could also teach the little polar bear how to hunt belugas. After all, this was an urgent matter. Time waits for no bear. Every mother bear eagerly wanted her cubs to grow up as soon as possible. This way, when they left the nest, the chances of their children dying prematurely would be reduced. Even the data recorded by humans showed that in the North Pole, no parent would spoil their children like AO Daisai. The author has something to say. If her brothers will swallow this fat piece of meat. End of the 3rd watch. Mwah, everyone. I'm going to sleep. Good night, Carrot W. Carrot. Chapter 23. The sea breeze blew gently, rustling the leaves of the bushes on the shore. It was supposed to be the best time to sleep, but only 7 hours had passed. Before Qiao Qi could wake up naturally, he was woken up by the sound of fighting. When he opened his eyes, Ao Daisai was sleeping next to him, which meant that he wasn't one of the main characters in the fight. Perhaps the other party also heard the noise, but his two white ears didn't move. Obviously, he was automatically isolated from the outside world. Little Bear, who had always been curious about the things around him, propped up his neck and looked in the direction of the noise. Then he saw the mother bear chasing the little polar bear. To be precise, it should be practicing fighting skills. It was said that the polar bear's biggest natural enemy was the polar bear. Of course, the little polar bear had to learn how to fight with the polar bear during its growth period. This was an essential survival lesson. Xiao Qishi saw that the mother bear was extremely ferocious. It didn't seem to show any mercy to the little bear as it swung its big paws at it. There were a few times when the little bear was flung away, causing Xiao Qishi's heart to clench in pain. Ouch, doesn't it hurt? Little Bear is still so small. The size of the two can't be compared at all. It's just a punching bag. The corners of Xiao Qishi's eyes twitched as she could not bear to look at it. He wanted to ask if it was this mother bear's problem, or were all mother bears so heartless? Where was the male mother? With his swollen face, Xiao Qishi's heart trembled. Although he hadn't slept enough, he couldn't fall asleep when he heard the sound of the little polar bear being hit. Probably because of the same reason. As an underage polar bear, he was afraid that he would also be hit by Ao Daisai. Of course, learning fighting skills was a must, but could he not be thrown around at this time? Ao Daisai woke up. It seemed that it was also woken up by the movements around it. Its eyes were still sleepy, and it seemed a little more harmless than usual. For the time being, he did not have the deterrence of the Polar King. Ao Daisai's first reaction when he woke up was to close his arms. He hugged Xiao Qishi in his arms and lowered his head to lick the fur on the little bear's head. Only then did he wake up completely. Xiao Qishi had been a pillow for many days and had long been used to the order in which Ao Daisai woke up. Usually, he was quite uncooperative, but today, he was affected by the beating of the children next door. Therefore, for the first time, not only did he not refuse to cooperate, he even took the initiative to lean into Ao Daisai's arms. Ao Daisai, the neighbor next door, is beating the child. Xiao Qishi wanted to say, "I'm so obedient, cute, and I eat so little. You can't hit me." Usually, when Xiao Qishi did not touch Ao Daisai, he was chased and licked by Ao Daisai 3 times a day. Now that he took the initiative to act coquettishly, of course, he was immediately licked vigorously. After rubbing for a long time and smearing saliva on each other's faces, Xiao Qishi finally felt reassured. He believed that Ao Daisai had accepted his sugar-coated bomb. At least for the time being, he would not have the idea of hitting the innocent little bear. With the neighbor next door as a control group, Xiao Qishi was also alerted. He knew that practicing various survival skills needed to be put on the agenda as soon as possible. Previously, because of the hurry, hunger, and lack of conditions to practice, the main point was that Ao Daisai did not care and did not have the slightest intention of teaching him how to hunt. Now that he had the conditions, he felt that he had to take it seriously. The little polar bear took the first step to learn how to hunt. He got up, stretched, and left Ao Daisai. With sleepy eyes, he came to the water under the hot sun and stood there, kicking his arms and legs as a warm-up exercise. Regardless of the success rate, he still had to make preparations. Xiao Qishi did not want to admit that he was still a little nervous about going into the sea to catch a white whale. This was a difficult challenge. It was normal to be afraid, and there was nothing to be embarrassed about. Xiao Qishi stood on the shore and stared at the turbulent sea for a while. Cough. He felt that he needed to mentally prepare himself. After a long time, he finally stretched out the soles of his feet and stepped on the rocks dotting the sea, step by step, toward the center of the sea. Slowly, the water level rose to half of his arm. At this time, he glanced back and was surprised to find that Ao Daisai was behind him, quietly watching him. Maybe he was too nervous just now. He did not notice this at all. The reason why Ao Daisai followed him was probably to escort him, he thought. To put it bluntly, it was afraid that he would suddenly fall into the sea and drown. or be dragged into the sea by a white whale or something. Xiao Qishi sighed at his own imagination. Forget it, forget it. If they want to watch me fail miserably, then let them watch. The little polar bear under the big polar bear's eyes turned back. First of all, he needed to get rid of all complicated emotions. There was only one clear goal left in his heart, and that was to hunt. As the king of the polar regions, polar bears have a very strong sensory system. They can rely on their keen sense of smell to know where their prey is. At this time, he did not need to rush to perceive where the prey was. He only needed to reduce his sense of existence and wait for the moment when the prey swam in front of him. Then, he could exert a strong explosive force to bite the prey. Therefore, the first thing that the little polar bear had to learn was patience. This process could take half an hour, or even longer. Compared to the little polar bear, Xiao Qishi had human rationality, and he did not lack the patience to wait. His biggest problem was not that he was impatient, but that he felt that the white whale swimming in the water was so cute. This sigh, Xiao Qishi did a good job of reducing his sense of existence. Soon, there was a white whale swimming in front of him, with small splashes on its back. When the sun shone, there was even a small rainbow. It was super dreamy. Admiring the living white whale up close, the little polar bear's eyes were wide open. The big polar bear was probably very puzzled. It had such a good opportunity, but it didn't eat it. Shouldn't he demonstrate it? Ao Daisai, who was squatting behind, glanced at the little fat bear's back and then at the white whale swimming in the water. His eyes seemed to say, "You really don't know how to do it." If there was no hope, there would be no disappointment. Ao Daisai looked up at the sky. The drone flew across the blue sky, attracting the big polar bear's attention, but that was it. Ao Daisai's attention was still on the little polar bear that was learning how to hunt. He finally couldn't help but raise his paw and touch the little polar bear's back. Xiao Qishi was under a lot of pressure. Okay, I got it. I'll catch it again. He also knew that he had dawdled for long enough, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it. What could he do? For the first time, he had to be a little mentally prepared. After Ao Daisai's silent urging, Xiao Qishi was ready to take the next step. Sorry, little white whale, I'm going to make a move. Watch carefully. Before Xiao Qishi opened his mouth and pounced, he felt that his aim was pretty good. This attack wasn't a sure hit, but it could still injure the enemy 800 times. The reality was that the moment he bit down, the white whale had already run away and hugged the loneliness. Oh no, the seawater. He choked on a few mouthfuls of seawater and floated up listlessly. He looked at Ao Daisai on a rock and felt quite wronged. Fortunately, Ao Daisai didn't seem to have any intention of laughing at him. The other party's actions were quite warm. He lowered his head and licked his soaked head. What Xiao Qishi didn't know was that the success rate of the little polar bear hunting a white whale for the first time was almost zero. Even Ao Daisai in the past was the same. It wasn't that easy to become independent. The little polar bear shook off the seawater on his head and climbed up the rock from the sea. He planned to continue working hard and continue to shamelessly wait for the next opportunity. He summarized the reason for his failure just now. It was nothing more than his actions being too slow. Once he moved, he alarmed the white whale. The other party had already run away, but he didn't even touch its tail. It was a little embarrassing. Ao Daisai returned to the place where it was escorting the little bear, very patiently guarding the little bear who was learning how to hunt. Actually, the wind was blowing and the waves were surging. Xiao Qishi jumped into the sea for the 6th time, but he still missed. And the 6th time, not only did he miss, he felt like he was hit by a white whale in the waist. This caused him to somersault in the sea. His 2 feet flopped on the surface of the water for a while, before he finally flipped over and floated to the surface. He wasn't bragging, but if polar bears had tears, the water level of the sea would have risen by a few points by now. Woo woo woo. Ao Daisai didn't know that the little bear was bullied by the white whale in the sea. At this moment, he received the little polar bear's coquettish signal. He seemed to feel that this learning session was over. Ao Daisai jumped into the sea, hugged the little polar bear with 2 thick and strong arms, and hugged the little polar bear to the shore. Xiao Qishi certainly felt this signal to stop. After feeling wronged, he was full of shame. 6 times. A total of 6 times, he didn't encounter the white whale once. The only time was when the other party hit him. How could he face this? In addition to lying on the shore and pretending to be dead to avoid Ao Daisai's very concerned gaze, Xiao Qishi didn't know what else he could do. Anyway, in Ao Daisai's eyes, he was already a hopeless, useless bear. Other than food, it was food. So painful. However, this didn't seem to be the case. On the shore, Ao Daisai was still very patient and carefully licked his hair. It was as if he didn't mind that he missed 6 times in a row and was even hit by the white whale. He was still the same as before, the little bear in his palm. The more this was the case, the more Xiao Qishi felt that he should work harder. He couldn't let down Ao Daisai's love and care. The hunting in the sea was over for now. He needed to carefully summarize the experience of today's failure and fight another day. This arrangement was reasonable. When the hair on his body was half dry, Xiao Qishi stood up again and looked at Ao Daisai with determination. There was a saying that he wanted to try free combat. Big guts. But so what? The countless failures and embarrassment just now had completely aroused Xiao Qishi's determination to improve. If he didn't want to continue being useless, he must pay the price of being thrown around. He was a little scared, but it didn't affect him. The little polar bear, whose hair was still folded, looked around. He slowly took a few steps back and planned the venue of the fight first. Then the question came. Xiao Qishi raised his head and thought, should the first move be a sneak attack on Ao Daisai, or should he let the other party know that he was about to start a fight? Due to the lack of experience and the legends that have been passed down, Xiao Qishi's face was tense, and he looked at the other party for a moment. He thought that Ao Daisai should have seen the hint in his eyes. Then Xiao Qishi lowered his center of gravity, roared twice, dug the ground with his hind legs, and rushed over. Ao Daisai, who was squatting in the sun, narrowed his eyes at first, but as the little polar bear gradually rushed over, his eyes became wider and wider. Xiao Qishi never dreamed that Ao Daisai would react like this when he rushed over aggressively at a speed of 60 kilometers per hour. Ao Daisai stood up without thinking and opened his arms to catch the bear ball perfectly. The moment he crashed into Ao Daisai's arms, Xiao Qishi felt the 800-kilogram Ao Daisai's lower body. How stable was it? To put it simply, the other party didn't move at all when the meatball that weighed a few hundred kilograms at 60 kilometers per hour crashed into him. Is there any justice in this world? Ao Daisai's strength set off his own weakness. For a moment, Xiao Qishi felt a little frustrated and broke down. He, who had jumped into Ao Daisai's arms, couldn't help but attack the other party's chest with his bare paws. It was said that a bear paw could have a force of dozens of kilograms. Even if the strength of his little bear paws was reduced by half, he could still make the other party suffer a little. The next plot should have been Ao Daisai's weak spot being attacked. He should have been furious and slapped the little bear, sending the little bear flying. However, Xiao Qishi was overthinking. The plot didn't develop as he expected at all. His little bear paws didn't cause any damage to Ao Daisai. At least, he was sure that Ao Daisai's expression didn't look like he was attacked. The large adult polar bear narrowed its eyes again, its dark eyes quietly looking down at the little bear that was behaving wildly in its arms. After a period of hard work, Xiao Qishi finally found a serious problem. Did Ao Daisai not realize that he was fighting with him at all? Or maybe the other party thought that he was acting coquettishly or playing around. Thinking about it, it was possible. Xiao Qishi nearly fainted as her swollen cheek started to hurt. Since the bear paws couldn't cause any damage to the other party, he would use his mouth to bite. Xiao Qishi thought fiercely. Then, he tilted his head and bit one of Ao Daisai's arms. Of course, he used more strength than usual, but it wasn't to the extent of breaking the skin. The little polar bear's sharp baby teeth pierced the skin and seemed to finally feel a trace of pain. Ao Daisai's eyelids moved slightly. His eyes became deeper, and he seemed to be a little confused. Xiao Qishi rolled his eyes and thought for a moment. Oh, right, he seemed to have forgotten a curse. According to his observation, before polar bears fought, roaring at each other was an essential part of the process. Oh, whoa! Xiao Qishi followed suit. He stood on the soles of his feet and roared fiercely at Ao Daisai. He quietly waited for the result. Ao Daisai's eyelids moved again, giving people a thoughtful feeling. The next second, the situation changed. He suddenly lowered his head and opened his mouth, growling at the little polar bear. The low frequency of the growl instantly spread around. It was even better than the best sound system Xiao Qishi had ever heard. The sound directly shook his heart and even his soul. The only thing he felt was fear, and his hair stood on end. When Xiao Qishi came back to his senses, he found himself sitting on the ground. His two fat legs were faintly trembling. The adult polar bear's bloodline suppression of the little polar bear was simple, direct, and obvious. Even if Xiao Qishi had the soul of an adult, he couldn't control his body's instinctive reaction and showed fear. He first became angry with his own embarrassment and cowardice. Damn it, how could Ao Daisai do this? Isn't this too much? Then he couldn't help but think that there was a big difference between polar bears, right? In short, Ao Daisai was definitely a very strong one. Thinking about it this way, it seemed reasonable that he was frightened by the other party's roar and his legs went soft. Xiao Qishi sat on the ground and thought about it. He didn't notice the shadow above his head. Ao Daisai had been watching him for a long time, his eyes filled with worry. Perhaps Ao Daisai noticed that Xiao Qishi wanted to improve. If he was a qualified parent, he should have 100 ways to train the little polar bear into a talent. But he might not be a qualified parent. He was just a male polar bear with no parenting instincts. However, Ao Daisai definitely knew much more things than other male and female polar bears. Other polar bears might not deliberately scare the little polar bear and then slowly coax it. But Ao Daisai knew how to do it. After quietly watching the little polar bear's failure to hunt and bringing it ashore, Ao Daisai scared the little polar bear, who wanted to practice fighting skills, with a terrifying roar. Finally, Ao Daisai gently licked its fur and hugged the little bear, who had been frightened and tired all day, to sleep. The author has something to say. Ao Daisai didn't have the consciousness to teach hunting. He felt that he was enough, and strong males were a threat and competitor to him. Xiao Xiao's learning is a process. It will grow. Give me some time. In addition, the update time is noon every day, 12 o'clock. There are updates every day. It hurts to see a little angel say that I stopped updating after I entered V. I have updates every day. Chapter 24. After Otis's assault, Xiao Qishi fell asleep after being comforted by his gentle comforting. She was frightened and exhausted after half a day of sleep. However, before he fell asleep, his heart was very uneasy. For a long time, Xiao Qishi had habitually accepted Ao Daisai's meticulous care, which almost made him forget the true identity of Ao Daisai, that was a king of ice who was naturally alone. His combat prowess was indisputable, and he was competitive and cruel in his bones. The reason why male polar bears like to attack young polar bears, in addition to hunger, was that they naturally knew how to strangle all threats and competitiveness around them, even if it was a young polar bear that had not yet grown up. This was the instinct of the beast, a potential consciousness written into the genes. Just like a kitten that had not opened its eyes yet, it would look for its mother's breast. There was an image called genetic memory, which was almost innate and difficult to erase. Ao Daisai's penetrating roar not only scared Xiao Qishi, but also reminded him of one thing. As a male polar bear, he would be Ao Daisai's competitor in the future. This was not overestimating himself, but it was true. In the eyes of Ao Daisai, he was an enemy bear that snatched survival resources and reproductive resources. It was an incredible thing that Ao Daisai did not kill him and even raised him. But how long would this abnormal phenomenon last? It had to be said that Xiao Qishi's speculation was correct. His thoughts were the same as most researchers' conclusions. They all believed that the turning point of this non-mainstream friendship would be Ao Daisai's first estrus. It was not far from summer to spring. Perhaps in less than half a year, Ao Daisai would find that he had made a losing deal. He raised an enemy bear that was useless and squeezed his living space, and then he would be kicked out in anger. Or he would beat him up before he was kicked out. Ah, this is scary. The little bear that was sleeping in Ao Daisai's arms today was a little bear that had something on his mind. Because of that deafening roar, Xiao Qishi felt that there was an inevitable estrangement between himself and Ao Daisai. How should he put it? They were seemingly united but actually separated. Ao Daisai was guarding against him, who was about to grow up and become a competitor, and he was guarding against when Ao Daisai would suddenly wake up and kill him. Just thinking about it was torturous. Wasn't it the ancient kings and ministers like this? Too torturous. Xiao Qishi thought about it and fell asleep. When he woke up again, the sun was still shining on the earth, and the sea breeze was still a little warm. Mama Bear and the little bear next door were not there. There was no Ao Daisai's figure. Yes, he was the only bear lying under the shade of the tree, guarding the empty, sleeping space alone. This was something that rarely happened. See, once a gap occurred, he would immediately lose favor and would definitely be kicked out. Xiao Qishi turned his head and looked around for his little yellow bucket. That would be the only private property he could take away. He heaved a sigh of relief when he found Little Yellow. In the process of looking for Little Yellow, Xiao Qishi saw Ao Daisai's figure. The other party was standing on the sea, quietly waiting for prey. It turned out that Ao Daisai had gone a hunt. Seeing the other party's huge back gave Xiao Qishi a sense of security. But this was wrong. Xiao Qishi looked at Ao Daisai's back in a daze and frowned slightly. Sigh. Actually, he did not want to rely on Ao Daisai so much. Moreover, he was an extremely petty fake bear. Yesterday, he was so afraid that he forgot to be angry. Now that he thought about it, Xiao Qishi was very sad. How could Ao Daisai roar at him so fiercely and realistically? Now that he thought about it, he still had lingering fears. The stingy little polar bear lay on its side under the shade of the tree. It hugged its feet and thought about whether it could survive after leaving Otis. What were the chances of him surviving until winter? Patting his fat belly, Xiao Qishi felt that it was a good idea. Although the days with Ao Daisai were very comfortable, it was not good for him to be alone as soon as possible. If he wanted to become a bear as soon as possible, going out to gain experience was a good choice. Of course, Xiao Qishi had to admit that the sudden idea of running away from home was partly because he was petty and pretentious. He, who had wisdom and thought, could never entrust his feelings to Ao Daisai, who relied on instinct to survive. This was unfair to him. The feelings of animals were too unpredictable, and it was also unfair to Ao Daisai. Ao Daisai had no obligation to carry his expectations. Since separation was a matter of time, and it was the destiny between him and Ao Daisai, it was better to take advantage of the situation now and break up with him. Okay, that's a reasonable decision. Xiao Qishi took a deep breath and thought to himself, "Goodbye, Ao Daisai. Today, I'm going on a long voyage with my little Xiao Huang." The quiet little polar bear let go of the sole of its foot that it had unknowingly bitten wet. It rolled up and went to pick up its yellow bucket. The sound of the sea breeze and the waves obviously increased the probability of this little bear successfully sneaking away. In order not to disturb Ao Daisai, who was hunting, Xiao Qishi used a method of hunting. He used his hands and claws to minimize his presence. He gently picked up the bucket, gently, while the direction of the long voyage had not been decided yet. Xiao Qishi raised his round head and looked at the entrance of the tributary against the wind. He wanted to go to the other side and fly away, but the sea at the entrance was wider and it was difficult to swim over. Deep in the tributary, that direction led inland, and the sea gradually narrowed. It was not so difficult to swim over, But the danger inland could not be ignored. The little polar bear, who had no fighting power, might encounter an accident. After thinking about it, Xiao Qixi decided to return to the entrance of the tributary, but he might encounter Mama Bear and Little Bear. He did not know if he would be beaten up if he passed under their eyes alone. But there was no perfect way in the world. He just had to do it. With the bucket in his mouth, the little polar bear tiptoed away. At this time, Ao Daisai's round, calm, and sharp eyes were focused and alert as he stared at the sea. To be precise, he was staring at the white whales swimming in the sea. Unlike the little polar bear, who rushed out recklessly when he was 80% sure, he was used to only acting when he was 100% sure. This way, he could save a lot of time and energy costs. Moreover, it had not been long since the last time he was full. Ao Daisai was actually not very hungry. He was just worried that the little bear was hungry, so he came out to hunt while it was still sleeping. Ao Daisai, who was simple by nature and did not have many emotions, would never have thought that the little bear he picked up would leave without a word while he was concentrating on hunting. Before catching the white whale, Ao Daisai's attention would be on the sea. Unless there was a strange movement behind him, he would not be easily distracted. Thanks to Ao Daisai's concentration, Xiao Qixi quietly left the polar bear's field of vision. On the way, he met Mama Bear and her little bear. However, the other party ignored him and did not do anything. That's great. Xiao Qixi ran happily on the shore. At this moment, he felt that freedom was waving to him. The vast world was singing for him. Even the grass on the side of the road seemed to be bowing to his brave decision. The wind was blowing, and the pony in his heart was whistling. It was so beautiful under the sunlight. With a splash, a pool of water splashed on the already turbulent sea. A huge white figure plunged into the sea with abnormally agile and fast movements. The group of whales in the water panicked and scurried in all directions. Only one of the white whales was Ao Daisai's target. Even if the others bumped into him, he would not take a second look. This was because he was determined to get the white whale that he had his eyes on. There was no need for him to divert his attention to catch the other white whales. Unlike Xiao Qixi, who had to close his eyes every time he plunged into the water, Ao Daisai did not close his eyes. Therefore, after every hunt, his eyes would be faintly red. In order to reduce the damage that the seawater did to his eyes, the only efficient way was to increase the success rate of his hunt. Ao Daisai was born with this knowledge. After he was 4 years old, the chances of him failing to catch a white whale were much lower. However, he failed today. The huge polar bear floated up from the sea and rushed out of the water with a splash. Then, it hurriedly shook off the seawater on its head. From Ao Daisai's expression and eyes, it was impossible to tell how he felt after a failed hunt. However, it was not difficult to guess his reluctance and helplessness from the way he stared back at the sea. Perhaps he was still a little too anxious. He was anxious to kill a white whale from the sea and drag it to the shore to feed the little bear that was still sleeping soundly. Ao Daisai climbed up from the sea. His wet, transparent fur clung to his strong body. The sun shone on his face, causing his pupils to contract involuntarily, turning from round to oval. He stuck out his tongue and licked the seawater around his mouth. He planned to change his position and continue hunting. Before this polar bear was only patient. He stepped on the rocks in the sea and moved slowly while looking up at the shade of the trees on the shore. Then his eyes widened a little. At the same time, he was a little confused. In his memory, Xiao Qixi should be sleeping soundly under the shade of the tree. However, there was no sign of the little polar bear there. Even the little yellow bucket that the other party liked very much was not on the shore. Between continuing to hunt or going back to take a look, Ao Daisai only hesitated for a second. Then, he walked towards the shore with his paws, and his speed was getting faster and faster. As a result, the shade under the tree where they slept was empty. There was no sign of the little polar bear. He looked up and looked around. As far as his eyes could see, there was still no sign of the little polar bear. This was an unusual thing. Of course, it was also difficult to understand. Although Ao Daisai was at a loss, he did not think too much about it. The polar bear was able to track its target based on scent alone. With its wet fur, it immediately ran in the direction where Xiao Qixi had left. When Ao Daisai's figure flashed in front of Mother Bear's eyes, the mother bear and her child stared blankly at the polar bear for a while. The experience of this pair of mother and son was special enough. After all, other polar bears would never encounter a male polar bear chasing after another male polar bear that had run away from home. It was ridiculous. However, the ubiquitous drones recorded this scene as always. In terms of running speed, Xiao Qixi's ability was limited for the time being. He secretly ran 10 kilometers when Ao Daisai was not paying attention. That's right, a full 10 kilometers. He did not escape the range of the polar bear's nose at all. It took less than half an hour for Ao Daisai to catch up with him. To be precise, it took 25 minutes. Seeing the little bear's back, Ao Daisai slowed down. With a puzzled and cautious gaze, he focused on the little bear in front of him and did not make any sound. This was a subconscious action of polar bears when they surrounded their target. It could be seen that Ao Daisai's position on Xiao Qixi was that he owned it. Xiao Qixi finally discovered Ao Daisai's figure when he was 10 meters away from Ao Daisai. Suddenly, his mind buzzed. It's over. His first reaction was to run away. The alarmed little bear fled in a panic. Ao Daisai immediately chased after him. A distance of 10 meters was easy to conquer in his eyes. And that was the truth. Before Xiao Qixi could plan his escape route, he felt a shadow over him. Oh no! A strong wind blew over first. It messed up his hair. It also messed up his heart. Ao Daisai, who had rushed behind the little bear, braked. Otherwise, Xiao Qixi might have been squashed by his huge body. However, this torture could be avoided, but the other torture was unavoidable. Ao Daisai subconsciously bit the fur on the back of Xiao Qixi's neck and pressed his body down, firmly trapping the other party under his body. Xiao Qixi's small yellow bucket was innocently thrown far away during the dispute. The sound of collision. Future Xiong's heart bled when he heard it. F*CK. The back of his neck was bitten so painfully. Xiao Qixi was in pain and at a loss for a moment. Why did Ao Daisai do this? Ao Daisai, who had rushed over to catch him just now, had a fierce aura on his body. He seemed to be very angry. Was it because he ran away from home? It shouldn't be. Shouldn't Ao Daisai be happy to have one less piece of trash to raise? Why was he angry that he left? Unsurprisingly, the other party couldn't answer any of these questions. That wasn't the point. It hurt. Well. The North Star didn't cry, but the polar bear really cried. Ao Daisai immediately relaxed his teeth that were biting the back of the little bear's neck because of this sobbing. Then, he quickly licked the place where he had just bitten. There was no injury, and there was no broken skin. He didn't use much strength. However, Xiao Qixi still made a lot of noise. Those who didn't know would think that his neck was broken. Ao Daisai lowered his head and pressed against Xiao Qixi's face. He tried to look into the other party's eyes, or just analyze the little bear's condition through his keen sense of smell. In short, he was a little flustered. He had never encountered such a situation in his life. A little polar bear that was pretending to cry. Ao Daisai couldn't understand why the other party left, and other questions, unless he had human wisdom one day. Otherwise, he would only rely on instinct to survive and deal with things. Really? Xiao Qixi suddenly stopped pretending to cry because he was also thinking about this problem. Why did Ao Daisai chase him? Was he reluctant? He didn't know, but he had to admit one thing. Ao Daisai had done a lot of things that didn't conform to his instincts, such as raising a little polar bear. As the little polar bear that was raised by luck, Xiao Qixi slowly turned around and met Ao Daisai's dark and focused eyes. It turned out that the other party had been looking at him all this time. Their eyes met, and they communicated with each other. Xiao Qixi still couldn't tell what Ao Daisai was thinking. Blinking his eyes, the little polar bear pretended to struggle for a while. Then he was pressed down by Otis and pressed down on him. At this moment, not to mention struggling, even breathing was strenuous. Okay, Xiao Qishi knew that Ao Daisai was afraid that he would run away. Woo 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 woo. As soon as the delicate and soft cry came out, the Taishan on top of them paused and loosened the space a little. Woo 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 woo. The little polar bear wanted more space to move. Ao Daisai lowered his eyes and looked at the little bear that was being suppressed by him. After a while, he was still fooled and loosened more space. Knowing that Ao Daisai still cared about him, Xiao Qishi felt a little better. After all, he scared the other party. But he didn't completely vent his anger. If he wanted to completely eliminate the grudge in his heart, he could. He suddenly bit the other party's arm in the same position, with the same strength. No, this time he bit harder. Ao Daisai narrowed his eyes and felt the pain, but this time he didn't use that terrifying roar to scare the little bear. Polar bears have good memory and logical abilities. Perhaps he had already understood the reason why the little polar bear ran away. Once was enough to scare the little bear. Ao Daisai didn't respond. Could it be that it wasn't because of the pain, but because of swearing? Xiao Qishi let go of his mouth and glared fiercely at Ao Daisai's face. He thought about it and decided to copy and paste yesterday's swearing. Woo-woo. This time, Ao Daisai still didn't show any signs of getting angry. He even lowered his head and licked his mouth where he had just finished swearing. He even seemed to be encouraging him, telling him that he could scold him more if he was unhappy. *CK. Xiao Qishi felt that he was crazy. Otherwise, how could he interpret such a complicated meaning from a polar bear's eyes? He must have gone crazy. However, the other party didn't become fierce again. Forget it. He knew that he was wrong. How could he argue with a polar bear? Xiao Qishi comforted himself generously in his heart. Then he raised his head and licked Ao Daisai's mouth. It was a signal to shake hands and make peace. After all, this was the most direct way for animals to express their friendliness. Ao Daisai's dark eyes glowed slightly, and he seemed to be extremely happy. After being licked by Xiao Qishi, he immediately pressed down on the little bear very enthusiastically. Soon, Xiao Qishi's face was smeared with Ao Daisai's scent. Then, not only his face, but also the places on his body that he usually licked were all taken care of by Ao Daisai. That enthusiasm and careful care made Xiao Qishi feel that he could do it again. It turned out that after going around in circles, he was thinking so much about himself. Ao Daisai didn't have so many thoughts. Liking was liking, and favoritism was favoritism. It was very direct and pure. It even gave people the illusion of a blazing heat. Xiao Qishi couldn't help but wonder if the polar bear's emotions were really so strong. The little polar bear clung tightly to Ao Daisai's chest, feeling the other party's heartbeat that was different from that of humans. Yes, it was different from humans, but now the two of them were the same, right? So they weren't bedfellows. No matter what happened in the past, at this moment, they were companions. They relied on each other and trusted each other. There was no need to worry and be suspicious of each other. Xiao Qishi rubbed against Ao Daisai, who had calmed down. The other party didn't need to think and directly rubbed against him back. Finally, his little eyes seemed to ask him, was it enough? The author has something to say. If you want to see the sentimental love and hatred between two polar bears, please watch the next episode. Haha, by the way, to answer the question of when I'm old, there will be arrangements. Xiao Qiao's emotional sustenance will not be empty and lonely. In the end, they will all get what they want. There will definitely be a happy ending in the end. Ao Daisai indeed could only live for about 30 years as a polar bear, but his spirit would never die. There will be arrangements. There will be arrangements. Chapter 25. After being together for a long time, Xiao Qishi, who had already turned into a polar bear, became more sensitive to the body language of its own kind. Therefore, he was sure that his interpretation of Ao Daisai's expression was not a figment of his imagination. It was just that some of the meanings were too complicated. Even Xiao Qishi himself couldn't believe that this was what Ao Daisai wanted to express. He only dared to believe the simple meaning. At this moment, Ao Daisai asked him with his eyes, "Do you want to continue licking my fur?" The little polar bear shivered and quickly raised its fur. It shook its head to show that it was enough. It was too much. The warm and wet licking was something he didn't want to experience again today. Oh no, this week. The runaway incident came to an end. Xiao Qixi licked his paws and then struggled out of Ao Daisai's arms because he remembered something important. Sob, sob, sob. Thinking about what happened to the little yellow bucket, Xiao Qixi turned into a sobbing monster and quickly ran to the place where the other party was killed. It was a cramped stone pit. It wasn't deep, but there was no place to start. Ao Daisai immediately followed. In response to the little bear's sobbing, the polar bear's throat made a deep bass sound. It was like the best sound quality subwoofer on the human market. It was meant to comfort the little bear. Ao Daisai leaned over and looked down at the little yellow bucket in distress. It seemed to empathize with the little bear. It lowered its head and licked the little bear's ears. Then, it lifted its legs and stepped into the pit. Xiao Qixi blinked and lay on the pit. He nervously watched Ao Daisai rescue the little yellow bucket. Fortunately, Ao Daisai was tall and big. This pit was easy for him. The other party's two front paws moved forward a little. It lowered its head and held Goldie in its mouth. Then, it returned to the ground and stared at Xiao Qixi for a moment with Goldie in its mouth. Looking at the small yellow bucket, it was great that nothing happened to it. Xiao Qixi was overjoyed. He was about to happily take the bucket and thank Ao Daisai for helping him. However, before he could do anything, Ao Daisai turned around and walked toward them with the bucket in its mouth. Ao Daisai? Xiao Qixi chased after him with small steps. She did not know whether to laugh or cry. That was his private property. Ao Daisai would not touch it unless he was lazy and forced her to help him. Right now, he wasn't even forcing the other party to take it, yet he was being so attentive. Was this still an act of admitting his mistake? It took Ao Daisai 25 minutes to run here, and now it would take more than 25 minutes to walk back. The little polar bear, who felt that it had not eaten for a long time, looked at the sea in the distance and swallowed its saliva. When they passed by the territory circled by Mama Bear again, they received 2 stares. When they left, Xiao Qixi did not have the guts to greet the other party. Now that Ao Daisai was here, he openly stared back. Of course, the way he looked at the little polar bear was quite gentle. Xiao Qixi muttered, "If it wasn't for your mother, I would have stroked you bald." Just like how Ao Daisai stroked him all day long. Half an hour out and an hour back. It was all his own fault. The little bear felt that his legs were sore and his stomach was hungry. He could only lie down to feel more comfortable. Therefore, he had to stop learning today. It was not his fault. His body and mind were affected. The lazy little bear lay in the shade of the tree to excuse himself. It looked at the sky. The sky was really blue. He hugged his feet and scratched at them. Then, he looked at Ao Daisai, who had gone hunting. He was being raised by a big boss. His bear life was really good. Do you have any shame? The voice in the depths of his heart asked again and again. If one day Ao Daisai fell sick and could not get up, would you be able to feed him like how he fed you? The 2 questions instantly made Xiao Qixi feel guilty for scratching his feet. He got up quickly, shook his fur, and went to find Ao Daisai to learn hunting skills. On the sea, Ao Daisai moved slowly, looking for a good place to squat. The little polar bear, who was supposed to be sleeping, suddenly approached and attracted his attention. It was obvious that he was very confused. Or rather, he did not want Xiao Qixi to join the fun. The success rate of 2 bears hunting together was not necessarily higher. The little polar bear did not understand what he meant. He still insisted on staying in the seawater that was about to submerge his head. Who told him to be short? In order to not get water into his nose, Xiao Qixi had to stand on the rock in a standing position. As everyone knew, it was easier to support a fat body with 4 legs. Supporting a fat body with 2 legs was equivalent to increasing the amount of exercise. Ao Daisai could not drive the little bear away. He moved his nose a little helplessly, as if he had accepted having a burden beside him. Hunting was not child's play. If he failed, he would go hungry. As long as Ao Daisai had a trace of ruthlessness, Xiao Qixi would have gone back to the shore and stayed there obediently. The problem was that Otis was very arrogant. He would rather take the risk of losing the hunt than chase them away. Fortunately, Xiao Qixi was very obedient. He stayed in the water and moved slowly. He was a good student when it came to hiding himself. The only thing on his body that moved was his eyes. The little polar bear's pure and beautiful big eyes followed the swimming fish in the water. His pupils shrank and dilated with his mood. He secretly observed the big polar bear next door. Ao Daisai was so strong and tall. The other party stared at the water without blinking. There was a murderous look between his eyebrows. He was very handsome. It was only at this time that Xiao Qixi remembered the title of the King of Ice. It was very arrogant. Well, if he secretly looked at Ao Daisai, would Ao Daisai also secretly look at the little bear next door? Once Xiao Qixi had this doubt in his heart, his eyes no longer looked at the swimming fish in the sea. He stared intently at Ao Daisai every minute and every second. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 10 minutes passed. The results of the test were out. As Xiao Qixi expected, Ao Daisai was very focused during the hunt. It only focused on the white whale and did not look at him at all. 666. Ao Daisai was awesome. Just like that, Xiao Qixi stared at Ao Daisai, and Ao Daisai stared at the white whale. Time passed quietly. After the failure of the previous hunt and the interference of the little bear, Ao Daisai was obviously more cautious than before. It did not want to fail again. It only attacked when there was a 100% chance of success in front of Ao Daisai. Xiao Qixi stared at Ao Daisai. Of course, it was not because he was infatuated. He just wanted to see what signs Ao Daisai had before it attacked, and under what circumstances it would attack. Although he stared intently, the moment Ao Daisai jumped into the water, Xiao Qixi felt that he missed a few frames. He saw Ao Daisai biting a white whale in the water in the blink of an eye. The unlucky white whale struggled with all its might and swung its thick tail. This was not the main point. The main point was that the battle circle had unknowingly come to its side. The innocent little bear was hit by the white whale's tail. The slap was louder than the slap his mother gave him when he was a child. Thank you very much. Xiao Qixi was caught off guard by the tail attack. The whole bear was stunned. Then, its body fell into the sea uncontrollably, and it immediately gulped down a few mouthfuls of seawater. The seawater was astringent and salty. The taste was quite unpleasant. Xiao Qixi scrambled to find his way in the water. At the same time, he witnessed the whole process of Ao Daisai biting the white whale underwater. That was called ferocious. The white fangs made the little bear shudder. It was very glad that it was not Ao Daisai's prey. Xiao Qixi, on the other hand, was not in a hurry to surface. Instead, he bravely swam over. Taking advantage of the fact that the white whale was not completely dead, he used this unlucky white whale as his hunting practice and viciously bit it. White whales were slippery in the water. Only sharp teeth could catch them. Seeing Xiao Qixi's actions, Austin blinked in the water. In the next second, he slowly let go of the half-dead white whale. As everyone knew, even if aquatic animals died, they could still swim far away. As soon as Austin let go, the white whale flew away. The little polar bear, who was still biting the white whale, was immediately taken away by the white whale. Suddenly encountering such a situation, Xiao Qixi felt that he did not wet himself. Instead, he tightly bit the prey and did not let go. His performance was commendable, but as a future bear, he could not be so low. Xiao Qixi thought, and tried to overcome his fear of the deep sea. He spread his limbs and paddled desperately, trying to compete with the white whale's strength. In this tug of war, after the little polar bear used all its strength, they were finally evenly matched. Then, if the little polar bear did not kill the white whale, then the white whale would kill the little polar bear. However, this kind of life and death situation would not happen. A white figure swam over and fiercely bit the white whale's fatal part. When Ao Daisai bit, its eyes were focused on the flustered little bear. Xiao Qi could not describe what he was feeling. Maybe this was the feeling of being despised. So what if your hunting skills are superb? So what if you are tall and strong? Xiao Qi secretly stared at Ao Daisai and thought, when I grow up, I will be as strong as you. Just wait and see. When the white whale stopped struggling, the little polar bear finally used the buoyancy of the sea to drag the white whale out of the water with great difficulty. Ao Daisai, as an assistant, just quietly watched the little bear work. He did not participate in the dragging. However, after leaving the buoyancy of the sea, the weight of the white whale was difficult for Xiao Qi. Ao Daisai floated to the surface and saw a pitiful meatball that could not drag its prey ashore again and again. Its back was almost bulging with muscles. Even so, there was still no way. Woo-woo. The little polar bear immediately turned into a crying monster and turned around to ask for help from the big polar bear behind it. The other party narrowed its eyes and swam towards him. For some reason, Xiao Qi felt that Ao Daisai was in a good mood. Was it because it was being asked for help? Ao Daisai came to the little bear's side and licked the tip of the little bear's nose. Then, it bit the prey and dragged it to the shore. Xiao Qi was very envious of its steady movements. One had to know that cuteness was worthless in the face of strength. After such a long time, it was finally time to eat. Furthermore, today's prey. Xiao Qi lay on the back of the white whale and sniffed shamelessly to wake up the seawater. She thought to herself that she had contributed to this as well. Awesome, awesome. Xiao Qi praised himself very proudly. He raised his head and looked at Ao Daisai triumphantly. He looked like a primary school student who had scored double marks when he was young and brought his test paper home to see his parents. Ao Daisai looked back at him gently. He lowered his head and licked the blood on the white whale's wound. This action suddenly made Xiao Qi feel very social. Damn, did Ao Daisai treat him as food? Xiao Qi might think that he was overthinking this once, but it happened again and again. He was staring at his peerless face while eating meat. This made Xiao Qi think deeply. So it wasn't that Ao Daisai didn't like looking at him. Didn't he like it? It seemed that he didn't like looking at him because the situation didn't allow him to hunt. Oh, for some reason, Ao Daisai's penetrating gaze made Xiao Qi blush. He immediately lowered his eyes and focused on gnawing on the back of the prey. Ao Daisai's nose twitched. The next second, as if he still didn't give up, he tore off a piece of fat and fed it to Xiao Qi. Seriously, the moment he saw the fat meat, all the tension disappeared. Only the picky little bear's nagging was left. Maybe the white whale this time was bigger, so they didn't finish it. There was only a quarter left. Ao Daisai kept tearing off pieces of meat and feeding them to the little bear's mouth. To put it bluntly, Xiao Qi was about to vomit after being fed by the other party. He looked at the white whale on the ground that hadn't finished eating. He burped and thought that it was his fault that the white whale couldn't finish eating. Wasn't it because he had just eaten 2 days ago? Naturally, he wouldn't be like a bottomless pit after being hungry for a week. Xiao Qi buried his mouth between his 2 paws and pretended to be dead. He couldn't eat anymore. He couldn't eat a single bite. Really? Ao Daisai bit on the meat. Anyway, he had a lot of time, so he wasn't in a hurry. Occasionally, he would raise his head to look around, twist his neck, and think of feeding again. Xiao Qi. F*CK. At this moment, Xiao Qi was full even in his dreams. He sincerely swore that if he could, he was willing to donate 10 pounds of fat on his body to help the starving bears. Although he was full, Xiao Qi didn't forget that there were actually many starving polar bears on this continent. Not every polar bear was as strong and outstanding as Ao Daisai. He was living well now, but it was just that he was a survivor. Every year, some polar bears didn't have a good life, and some polar bears had a smoother life. He, who followed Ao Daisai, belonged to the smoother kind. As the saying goes, even if you are full, don't forget about your starving compatriots. Every time Xiao Qi hugged his round belly, he would worry about the situation of the other polar bears. Then, he prayed that this summer would pass quickly. He prayed that the temperature wouldn't rise anymore. Ao Daisai was so hot that he became a fool. It was obviously hot, but he still slept close to him. It made him, who was warm in the winter and cool in the summer, feel the heat. There were many people who prayed for this summer to pass quickly. They were all people who truly cared about the survival environment of polar animals. The highest temperature was coming soon. On some coasts of Greenland, groups of sea lions were basking in the scorching sun. Their weight and fangs made the hungry polar bears not dare to covet them even if they passed by. Even if the sea lion babies were a good medicine to relieve hunger. The single polar bears who had yet to find the holy land of summer wandered aimlessly, looking extremely helpless. It didn't matter if it was the hot temperature or hunger. The rescue agency on the island had also rescued some polar bears in more serious conditions this summer. If nothing unexpected happened, they would only be released this winter. After a busy day, it was finally time to get off work. The OP, who often posted Ao Daisai in Yulashanda, chatted about his recent work on the forum. His colleagues were simply hungry for the news he brought. They only learned about the latest situation through his description. A few polar bears that had been tracked down and were not in good condition had been rescued by the agency. It was great, but what they wanted to see the most was the latest situation of Ao Daisai and Yulashanda. What were those two fatties doing on the coast now? Of course, the story of Ao Daisai and Yulashanda had to be reposted. Hashtag Ao Daisai is teaching Yulashanda how to hunt. Hashtag the segment that everyone was most concerned about had finally arrived. The OP was very pleased to announce a development. Ao Daisai finally had the idea of teaching Yulashanda how to hunt. This was too difficult. Previously, Ao Daisai couldn't wait to even chew the meat for Yulashanda. As for the specific teaching method, everyone couldn't calm down for a long time after watching the video. They were very confused and shocked. Everyone present was a veteran who had watched many documentaries. They didn't remember the mother bear teaching the little bear like this. How was this teaching by Ao Daisai? It was clearly taking care of the child while hunting. It had no choice. Why do I feel like Ao Daisai's actions are perfunctory? Just this? I can hammer him. Isn't he teaching the little bear seriously? In today's video, Ao Daisai acted like he was gay. If they weren't both polar bears, I would think that he was gay. But Ao Daisai is so pampered. Yulashanda went out to play mischievously and was caught by Ao Daisai. Ha 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 ha. With all due respect, with a bear mentor like Ao Daisai, Yulashanda can only be a bear for the rest of his life. Sigh. I can only say that a loving father leads to a failure of a son. P.S. I know they aren't father and son. Don't blame me. Dog head save life. Hi. What do you mean by dog head save life? When I see dog head save life, I know that they are fellow countrymen. Ha ha. Although it's funny, I hope everyone will take it seriously. Yulashanda is already 2 years old. Male polar bears really don't have the awareness of parenting. Yulashanda should be raised by a mother bear. But where can we find a mother bear to raise Yulashanda at this time? The probability of two polar bears who are not related by blood being together is very low. In their situation, we can only take one step at a time. I hope that Yulashanda can work harder. When I saw Ao Daisai chasing after him with meat in his mouth, I didn't expect anything from him. Spreading my hands, it reminds me of raising a child from a different generation. Success is due to Ao Daisai. Failure is due to Ao Daisai. Poor Yulashanda. He was fed to the point of falling asleep. No, he might really be sleepy from eating. Ha ha. People would never dream that in addition to solving the problem of high temperature and hunger for polar bears, they would also have to solve this kind of non-mainstream parent-child education problem. All the polar fans in the forum knew that a male polar bear dog picked up a baby polar bear with a mouse, but did not raise it according to normal circumstances. He did not teach it how to hunt, did not let it work, and chased after it to feed it meat. He spoiled it too much. This was very worrying. If they continued to raise it in this way, even if they raised it for 10 years, the baby polar bear would still not be independent. He would only be raised to have no hunting ability and an overly naive temperament. To put it bluntly, he would be a daddy bear. Although it's funny, This is really a serious problem. The author has something to say. Yes, this is a serious problem. Everyone, after laughing, please treat it seriously. Also, it's time to answer questions again. Animals will not change into humans. The length of each animal is also quite long, about 200,000 words. There are many kinds of animals, so the whole article should be a long one. After all, there are so many handsome and sexy marine and land animals. I have to write to my heart's content. P.S. A.O. Daisai is so handsome, naturally black, HHHHH. Chapter 26. No matter how worried people were, the polar bear's life on land was still so helpless. They endured the high temperature and hunger, sparing their limited energy to find food to fill their stomachs. Or they would rather stay still, trying to rely on the fat on their bodies to wait for the ice and snow to fall. The smart sea doves came when they heard the news of the polar bear's mealtime. They chattered and shared the remains of the food left behind by A.O. Daisai and Xiao Qishi. After the third time, they remembered the location of this new feeding ground. As expected, the noisy seabirds and the smell of food debris in the air attracted new foragers. After more than 2 months of living on land, these polar bears that came from afar all looked tired. Their bodies were thin, and their eyes no longer had the innocent and lively light. Fortunately, the god of luck did not leave them. Before the group of white whales left the shallow waters, the few big gray guys finally caught up with them. Yes, it was dusty, especially the area on their faces and the back of their noses. It was simply pitch black. Compared to them, Xiao Qishi would realize how handsome and white she was. Of course, there was also A.O. Daisai, a proper dragon among bears. A total of 3 male polar bears arrived one after another. They were tired and posed no threat to Mother Bear and Little Bear. However, the cautious Mother Bear still took Little Bear to A.O. Daisai's territory to temporarily avoid danger. The purpose of the 3 polar bears was obvious. They were just the white whales wandering in the shallow sea. After a long journey, they were already hungry, but the delicious meal close at hand could not be rushed. They needed to plan slowly. The drone noticed this scene. In the camera, the 3 polar bears were scattered all over the sea, not interfering with each other. They were hungry and were about to display their best hunting skills. Soon, they might be able to get a delicious meal that they had not seen in a long time. Xiao Qishi was squatting in the shade of a tree and yawning in boredom. Suddenly, she saw Little Bear and her son walking over. Her eyes lit up. "Hi, Little Bear's neighbor. Hello, have you eaten?" Xiao Qishi did not know if it was an illusion, but it seemed that the little bear next door, who she had not seen for a long time, had grown a little taller. Was it because she had been eating more often recently? TSK, TSK, TSK. Little Bear's family really had to eat to grow. Thinking of this, Xiao Qishi could not help but look down at her waist, but she could not tell if she had gained weight or not. The only thing she was sure of was that she seemed to be twice as tall and strong as the little bear. This meant that she was no longer a baby, but a subadult bear. But so what? Otis still treated Zhang Heng like a baby. Other than hunting, Otis would not be distracted. Otis would not look at Zhang Heng at all. Chow 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 was a human being before she was 3 years old. Calm Chow 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 Chow. Now, Mama Bear's sudden arrival startled A.O. Daisai, who was sleeping beside Xiao Qishi. The behemoth, who was taller than any of the new polar bears, opened its eyes. It was still sleepy, but it quickly woke up. Then it got up and stretched its body. A.O. Daisai's actions were somewhat similar to that of a feline. Well, bears and dogs belong to the same family. Rather than saying that it was like a feline's behavior, it was more like a canine's instinct. Thinking of this, Xiao Qishi found it hilarious that A.O. Daisai and the dog were actually close relatives. When A.O. Daisai stretched, he had already noticed the mother and her son who had invaded their territory, as well as the smell of the unfamiliar polar bears drifting over from upstream. Chow 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 could tell from the way he stretched his neck that he was checking out the situation. The mother bear, and Ao Daisai were mother and son. They looked at each other from distance. In Xiao Qishi's eyes, this was a silent negotiation. The mother bear was testing Ao Daisai's attitude, and Ao Daisai was defending its position. Although there was no sound, there was no obstruction in their communication. In the end, just as Xiao Qishi had guessed, the mother bear with the cubs stopped at the edge of Ao Daisai's territory. This was the result of their discussion. Xiao Qishi couldn't help but feel proud of his interpretation ability. He had only been a polar bear for more than 4 months, but he could already roughly interpret the behavior and language of polar bears. It seemed that in another half a year, his communication with Ao Daisai would definitely be smoother and more natural. The 3 new neighbors didn't have any actual impact on Xiao Qishi's life, although he had already learned about them through his keen sense of smell. At the same time, Xiao Qishi wasn't disgusted by the strange polar bears coming here. On the contrary, there were plenty of hunting opportunities here, which could reduce the risk of starvation. One more polar bear hunting could eliminate the possibility of a polar bear starving to death. He was quite happy to see that. Belugas swam into shallow tributaries and stayed there seasonally. This meant that this polar bear paradise wouldn't last long. When the group of belugas swam back to the deep sea to rest, they would have to embark on a journey to find other food. Ao Daisai knew this very well. He would try his best to hunt for food in the limited time he had. He would feed himself and the little bear that was waiting to be fed. In the middle of August, the temperature on the coast had risen. It had surpassed last year's record and had reached a point where the polar bears were restless. The beluga whales that were about to swim back to the deep sea were becoming more and more difficult to catch. Even if they waited patiently for an entire day, they might not succeed. The little polar bear, who was learning to hunt with Ao Daisai, was slightly aware of the current situation. He didn't know if Ao Daisai was anxious or not. In short, he had been learning for so long and had yet to successfully hunt a beluga whale. He was so anxious that he began to shed fur. Of course, this was a seasonal problem. It was normal. Boo-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo. During the shedding season, Ao Daisai also had a bunch of bumps on his body. The trunk of a larger tree on the shore, as well as the uneven rocky ground, became tools that Ao Daisai used to assist in shedding fur and tickling. Obviously, these bumps on his body made him very uncomfortable. The places where his mouth could reach had been torn off by Ao Daisai. The little polar bear, who only knew how to eat, obviously came in handy at this time. Seeing Ao Daisai rolling on the ground in pain, the little polar bear put his mouth close and helped him clean off the bumps that had not been completely shed. Feeling the pulling force, Ao Daisai suddenly stopped moving and looked up at the little bear who was obediently helping him, helping Fong tear off the bumps on his body. This action would not happen between 2 polar bears, and there was no such consciousness in their genetic memory. Ao Daisai did this because he loved the little bear. The humans who observed them thought that the little polar bear was influenced by Ao Daisai. In short, these 2 were smart and gentle polar bears, and they seemed to be quite friendly with other polar bears. This season was the season when the fur on the bellies of polar bears was the thinnest because they needed to cool down. Xiao Qishi patiently cleaned up the old fur on Ao Daisai's abdomen and licked the faintly visible fragile part of the skin. A new layer of dense fine fur would soon grow here. It would be used for the winter. Ao Daisai lay motionless on his back and seemed to enjoy the little polar bear's thoughtful service. Every time the little bear stopped, he would look at the little bear with an expectant look. Even if he could not speak, he was full of language. Didn't Xiao Qishi stop to clean the fur on his mouth with his claws? He licked it again. There was a saying that Ao Daisai's abdominal muscles were really strong, and there was no fat at all. Although Xiao Qishi did not lick his belly, he could imagine that the gap between him and Ao Daisai was only 3.5 North Poles. Xiao Qishi, who was working hard and spreading his thoughts, wondered how Ao Daisai would feel when he licked his belly. Oh, it must be very greasy. Today was different from the past, and the world seemed to be getting more and more difficult. After being a child laborer at Ao Daisai's place, Fong Qishi wanted to hug him and sleep with him. But how could he sleep? He had not eaten for half a day. He patiently waited for Ao Daisai to fall asleep first. Then Xiao Qishi sneaked to the water's edge to lie down. Maybe he could catch a blind beluga whale. He really wanted to catch a beluga whale this summer and share it with Ao Daisai. Recently, the netizens on the forum had seen his ambition and determination. But Yulashanda, as a little bear, it was normal to not be able to catch a beluga whale. There was no need to stare at the sea for 24 hours a day. That way, Ao Daisai might think that he was neglecting his duty and did not feed him enough. Have you forgotten the nightmare of being chased and fed? Hashtag Yulashanda. Did you catch a beluga whale today? Hashtag the original poster posted a picture of the little polar bear hunting alone. In the picture, he was the only bear on the sea, the ambitious Yulashanda. Oh, look at this hard-working little glutinous rice ball. He has no edges at all. What's going on? There's no sign of Ao Daisai around. I knew it. He's not a reliable babysitter. No, Ao Daisai is resting. Looks like everyone misunderstood. Ao Daisai just caught a beluga whale not long ago. They're not hungry now. I guess Yulashanda just wants to learn how to hunt. The child is so hardworking. The old father shed tears of relief, although he did not succeed even once. I'm dying of laughter. No matter what the result is, this effort is worth praising. But I still have to say that Yulashanda is like a very hardworking classmate in my class. Every day, he comes the earliest and leaves the last, but his results, the previous poster Sai is very intelligent. Don't say that about Yulashanda. What's the most important thing these days? It's not the results, it's the attitude. No, the most important thing these days is the background. Don't you understand? Then I'll say it directly. I want a father like Ao Daisai. Sob, sob, sob. Or a husband. As more and more people paid attention to Ao Daisai in Yulashanda's lives, many netizens expressed that they liked Ao Daisai very much. He was doting, reliable, strong, and gave people a sense of security. Yulashanda was so good that it made people jealous. Especially women. It was almost impossible to resist his charm. The situation on the shore of the shallow sea was just as people had guessed. When Ao Daisai woke up and saw Xiao Qishi lying on the surface of the sea, he walked over without hesitation. He seemed to think that the little polar bear was hungry, so he went over and licked its head and face. Then he went into hunting mode and caught a beluga whale for the little polar bear to eat. Xiao Qishi's eyes drifted to the side. He's here. Once again, Xiao Qishi regretted that he could not speak. It was just that, after waiting here for half a day, he suddenly wanted to complain about it. The beluga whales in the sea were getting fewer and fewer, and all of them were extremely vigilant. No matter how they wandered, they would stay far away from him. Of course, because almost all the beluga whales in this area had been chased by Ao Daisai. The beluga whales were not stupid. Wouldn't they slowly become more vigilant? Speaking of which, the little polar bear, who was practicing hunting here, felt a little complicated at the moment. It was like a girl on her period, afraid that it would not come, but also afraid that it would come. How could the little bear forget the nightmare of being chased and fed? What if Ao Daisai caught a beluga whale in the next second, and it happened to be a fat beluga whale? Xiao Qishi shuddered when he thought of this. After thinking for a while, he thought of a good idea. Ao Daisai liked to be confident when he hunted, so he would not easily make a move if there was an ordinary opportunity. Hee. Xiao Qishi laughed in his heart. In the following period of time, he would rush in whenever there was an 80% chance. This way, Ao Daisai would not have to make a move. But there were repercussions to doing this. After 3 times, Ao Daisai looked at him as if he was a troublemaker. This farce ended when the troublemaker was tired and finally stopped causing trouble. He just quietly watched the strong people make their moves. Xiao Qishi did not expect that the next beluga whale would be their last delicious meal on the shore. It was like this. After eating and sleeping, when he went to the shore to study again, he found that the beluga whales were all gone. It was as if all the beluga whales had returned to the deep sea in one day. The formerly lively shallow sea had returned to tranquility. Xiao Qishi was a little stunned. It was very sudden. Did something happen? Ao Daisai seemed to have expected this. He was not reluctant to leave the coast where he had been living for nearly a month. When he found that the beluga whales had left the shallow sea, he also called the little polar bear to leave. In order to prevent the little bear from leaving with him, Ao Daisai cleverly held the little bear's favorite yellow bucket in his mouth. Hold the emperor to order his vassals? A sentence popped up in Xiao Qishi's mind. Recently, his mind had been filled with these strange things. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry at himself. He trotted to keep up with Ao Daisai's pace. Compared to Ao Daisai, who was not reluctant to leave his old home, Xiao Qishi had a strong sense of belonging to this coast. He suddenly felt a little depressed about leaving. After all, who would be willing to be a wandering prodigal if they could be stable? But maybe this was life. When there was food to eat, he was so full that he was about to vomit. When there was no food to eat, he was worried about where the next meal would be. But as long as he was with Ao Daisai, Xiao Qishi looked at Ao Daisai's huge and reliable back and thought happily that no matter where he was, he would not be lonely. The little polar bear ran up quickly and bumped Ao Daisai's big, but with his little butt. Yohu, brother. He was now full of expectations for the road ahead. Otis turned his head to look at the excited little bear when Coco bumped into him. His eyes sparkled as he stared at the happy little bear. Xiao Qishi thought vigilantly. I'm so cute. Will Ao Daisai want to sit on me and kill me? It's better to stay away from him. The little polar bear, who was full of thoughts, happily ran to the front. Of course, Ao Daisai didn't want to sit on him and kill him. He just chased after him and licked him. Xiao Qishi took the opportunity to snatch back his goldie and put it on his head. How could he not wear a level 3 helmet when he was traveling? If he stepped on a pit and fell, at least it could protect his head. Before he was hungry, the little polar bear maintained this spirit. He was the happiest along the way. Ao Daisai was always the center point. He quietly looked at the little polar bear, who was exploring the surroundings with him as the center. The terrain in the wild was not flat. Occasionally, they would need to climb, cross pits, and run through water. When they encountered a relatively high rock slope, Ao Daisai easily went up. He looked back at the little bear below and called out in a low voice. Xiao Qishi looked at the height and knew that he couldn't go up. He looked up and shook his head. No. He had to go around this place. After standing on top and watching for a moment, Ao Daisai looked around blankly. Finally, he turned his gaze back to the little bear. He came down from the slope and climbed again. He seemed to be saying, "It's easy, you see." Xiao Qishi only wanted to say, "Look at your bare head. Is there no flat road in the world? Why do you have to challenge this rugged path?" Ao Daisai licked his lips. He was in a stalemate with the little bear. He looked a little helpless. In the end, he came down the slope for the second time. At this time, Xiao Qishi thought that his non-violent non-cooperation had succeeded. However, in the next second, Ao Daisai came to his side, opened his mouth, and bit his neck. Yes, his entire neck, and then pulled him up the slope. Ow! The sudden shock and the dull pain from his neck made Xiao Qishi squeal like a pig. It resounded throughout this quiet land. Fortunately, this process was very short, only 2 seconds. Ao Daisai had successfully picked him up and carefully placed him on the flat ground. The little polar bear, who was crawling on the ground, was in tears. He felt as if his neck was broken. The feeling of being lifted up by the neck was a little too scary. No matter what, he was still a few hundred kilograms. Although Ao Daisai was 800 kilograms, it was as easy as lifting a kitten. Xiao Qishi, who was carried by Ao Daisai for the first time, turned his neck in fear. When he found that there was nothing wrong, he stopped looking scared. Ao Daisai took 2 tentative steps and looked back at the little bear quietly. Its eyes were full of doting and patience. It also had the intention of coaxing him to follow. Did Ao Daisai smell something delicious? Xiao Qishi got up from the ground and wiped Schrodinger's tears with his paw. Aha! He didn't expect it. He was pretending to cry again. According to their understanding of each other, He suspected that A.O. Daisai had found something delicious. Otherwise, it wouldn't have brought him over the mountains with such a clear goal. However, this place was bare. Xiao Qishi didn't have much hope. The little polar bear, who followed A.O. Daisai away from the coast and walked towards the land, had already made plans to not eat for a week. Living in the wild, one had to have the awareness of living in the wild. If one wanted to eat every day, did they think they were bears? Two polar bears, one big and one small, walked slowly on the grassy slope. Maybe they walked 50 kilometers or maybe 80 kilometers. In short, they walked for about 3 days. The drone didn't know where they were going. It couldn't help but worry about the future of these two little angels. After following A.O. Daisai for 3 days, a human wooden house appeared in Xiao Qishi's field of vision. This was the first time he saw a human building after returning to nature. Xiao Qishi's first reaction was not surprise, but worry. After all, A.O. Daisai was still in the hospital. That was the cruel work of poachers. But then again, A.O. Daisai's sense of smell was so sensitive. If it dared to come here, it meant that there were no traces of humans here. Xiao Qishi was stunned. No way, no way, A.O. Daisai's target was this house. Xiao Qishi felt guilty. My brother bear, burglary is at least 3 years old. You can't do whatever you want just because we're bears. That's not good. Slurp. However, the fishy smell coming from inside was damn delicious. The author has something to say. Greenland's news today. 2 summer polar bears may have been too hungry and had no choice but to rob a house. They are so cute. The little polar bear heard the call of the guardian bear and immediately looked back at A.O. Daisai with a mouth full of bright red ketchup. Compared to A.O. Daisai, who was interested in the dried fish, Xiao Qishi was more interested in the ketchup, canned fruit, sandwich biscuits, and candy here. Woo-woo. Seeing these long-awaited foods, Xiao Qishi felt a sense of familiarity and was a little excited for a moment. Yulashanda liked it here. Yulashanda made a happy sound. The sweet and sour taste of the ketchup made A.O. Daisai wrinkle his nose, but this did not mean that he did not like it. He moved his nose to get more information about the smell in the air. Polar bears living in the wild would judge carefully what could be eaten and what could not be eaten. A.O. Daisai put down the dried fish in his mouth and tasted the taste of the ketchup at the tip of Xiao Qishi's nose. It was sour and sweet, like summer berries. These foods were all edible, and A.O. Daisai probably had not tasted them before. Xiao Qishi, a fake bear that was transitioned from a human, couldn't wait to share with his little friend. He simply opened a can of fruit. Here, it must be explained in detail how he opened it. First, he hugged the can with his 2 paws, then tilted his head and pulled the tab with his canine teeth. Even humans could easily pull the tab of the can. The little polar bear, who was smart enough not to be spied on by humans, eagerly brought the can of fruit to A.O. Daisai, hoping that the other party would try it. Big guys who like to eat honey were born with a sugar tongue. When the can was opened, A.O. Daisai smelled the rich smell of sugar, and his attention was attracted by the small can box. But how to eat it more conveniently is the problem. Without thinking for a long time, Xiao Qishi looked up and immediately raised his paw to touch his head. This is called keeping yellow for 1,000 days. And using it for a moment, isn't it coming in handy? Xiao Qishi placed little yellow on the ground and poured all the canned fruit into it. For a time, the small wooden house was filled with the sound of Xiao Qishi opening cans and the sound of empty cans being thrown away. He also witnessed the little polar bear opening the can to get the fruit pulp. Perhaps it was not difficult to open cans, and A.O. Daisai also knew this skill. He was also very interested in the fruit pulp, so he sat down on the spot and picked up a can. After shaking off the tab and the lid with his mouth, he held it to his mouth and licked the pulp inside. When his tongue licked the pulp, the sweetness bloomed on his taste buds, and the taste was very good. This can of fruit, which may or may not have expired, brought A.O. Daisai joy, and he seemed to like it very much. After walking on the road for 3 days, the 2 polar bears were already hungry. Sweet food and sweet juice were undoubtedly delicious food. Xiao Qixi stopped opening cans. He had already poured half a bucket. It was delicious. Ao Daisai also ate the sausages. His attitude towards food was much more positive than the little bear's because eating was the first priority. Only a strong body and energy could feed the little bear. The little bear ate 2 large sausages as thick as an arm and was satisfied. However, his throat was a little uncomfortable, so he began to rummage through the house to find a drink to quench his thirst. Fortunately, Xiao Qixi found a glass bottle of soda on the cabinet. He groped around and opened a bottle. His teeth were a natural bottle opener. It was easy to get the sweet soda in the bottle. It seemed to be prepared for a child to drink. There was also wine placed together. This was not surprising. How could people in the cold zone live without wine? Of course, Xiao Qixi was not interested in these spirits. He sat on the floor and panted slightly. His fat body leaned against the cabinet, and he obediently drank the orange-flavored soda. The sweep just now had tired him quite a bit. Ao Daisai ate the rest of the sausages. Xiao Qixi guessed that he might have also been drunk. At this time, his eyes swept around and stared at the bottles of soda that Xiao Qixi was holding between his legs. Ah, this Ao Daisai also wants to drink soda? Okay. The sausages were indeed salty. Xiao Qixi was about to reluctantly give up 2 bottles of his favorite soda for Ao Daisai to taste, but Ao Daisai quickly stared at other targets. It was also a glass bottle, but it was not soda. It was Greenland wine. Xiao Qixi's eyes twitched. Was Ao Daisai going to drink? Ah, he wanted to stop him. What if he got drunk? As burglars, Xiao Qixi felt that they should quickly leave after drinking. Drinking would delay things. However, he did not have an effective way to stop Ao Daisai. The other party seemed a little interested in the smell of the wine. After cautiously exploring, he actually drank. Ao Daisai actually liked to drink. The little polar bear holding the orange soda burped, and then prayed in his heart that the other party was not drunk and would leave later. However, he was sleepy after eating and drinking, and his eyelids slowly became heavy. Oh no, it seems that I have to sleep here. The sleepy little polar bear smacked his lips and used his stubborn willpower to drink the remaining soda in the bottle. Then he curled up on the floor and fell asleep. He didn't know when Ao Daisai returned to his side. He only vaguely smelled the smell of alcohol approaching, and then a wet tongue licked his mouth, nose, and face. It was like a human who started to act like a hooligan after drinking, he thought. Ao Daisai, a little hazy, hugged the sleeping little bear and licked the other party's face lovingly. This behemoth who only drank a bottle of wine was not drunk. He was just a little tipsy and seemed to be in a good mood. It seemed that this feeling of drunkenness was not only liked by humans, but even animals could not resist it. Xiao Qixi, who was sleepy after drinking soda, slept very comfortably and felt very safe. Perhaps it was because he slept indoors for a long time. He was shielded from the wind on all sides and was not exposed to the scorching sun. There was also a natural pillow beside him that gave him gentle caresses in his sleep. This was the greatest sense of security. After the dream, when he first came ashore more than 2 months ago, Xiao Qixi, who was sleeping in the house today, had a dream about humans again. It was a very ordinary dream. Xiao Qixi dreamed of his former school life. There were familiar faces around him, and the names of his classmates and teachers were still so clear. There was also the scene after work. The boss was very nice and liked to take them to eat delicious food after work. It was a warm dream, without the reluctance of parting or the regret of no longer contacting him. He felt that his current life was not bad. The open-minded Xiao Qixi remembered a sentence: when things go against your wishes, it must be God's other arrangement. So, Ao Daisai was God's arrangement for him. Otis had a good night's sleep. The effects of the alcohol had allowed him to fall into a deep slumber. This would allow his body and mind to recover. The cabin was very quiet. As a building far away in the suburbs, there was no electricity here. The only thing that could expose the crimes of the 2 polar bears was the drone that followed them, but the drone could only capture the scene of them breaking in. As for what the two bears did in the house, probably only they knew. Maybe 8 hours passed, or maybe 10 hours passed. Chao Chi woke up slowly in Ao Daisai's arms. He curled his paws and yawned. Looking around, it was a mess. It was a bit like the scene after a carnival party that had not had time to clean up. That's right. It was the carnival of two polar bears. Not only were there soda and delicious food, but there was also alcohol. Chao Chi looked up at the drunk Ao Daisai. The handsome big guy was sleeping soundly, his head leaning against the wall, and the place where they slept looked a bit hidden. Even if someone came in, they would not be seen at first glance. It seemed that no matter where he slept, Ao Daisai would think carefully and habitually hide himself. His sleep was great. Chao Chi smacked his lips, raised his paws, and stretched. Then, he lay in Ao Daisai's arms and continued to laze in bed. He did not need to go to school, and he did not need to go to work. Why did he wake him up? A polar bear's sleep and a human's shift. The owner sorted out today's data and suddenly did not know whether to laugh or cry at what he saw. At the same time, he was a little worried. Why did Ao Daisai and Yalashanda go inland and break into a human's cabin? Although he knew that polar bears were very smart, and there must be no one in the cabin, so they went in. But it had been so long, and the two big guys still had not come out. There were also sugar cubes condensed on his fur. It was quite dirty. Chao Chi was thinking about how to clean up when Ao Daisai's head poked over. The other party's flexible tongue swept away the biscuit crumbs on his stomach and the sugar on his fur. What else could the spoiled little bear say? He could only lie down and continue to eat. Ao Daisai no longer coveted the little bear's food, but he was obviously a sentimental bear. After cleaning the little bear's stomach, he suddenly raised his head and put his mouth next to the little bear's mouth. Chao Chi thought that Ao Daisai wanted to eat the biscuit in his mouth, so he generously gave it to the other party. Take it, you're welcome. However, Ao Daisai was obviously just teasing the little polar bear. He gently held the biscuit in his mouth and returned it to Chao Chi. Chao Chi, damn, can you not be like this? He would blush like this. Sometimes, Chao Chi would deliberately ignore the meaning expressed by Ao Daisai, such as his flirtatious behavior now. I must have misunderstood. Polar bears do not have such improper thoughts. The author has something to say. Be more careful. He is gay, stinky dried fish. I will roll my dead fish eyes and not speak. When you finish me, don't forget to send me a lunchbox. For a long time on the road, perhaps Ao Daisai felt that the little bear's mouth was sweet because every time he licked the other party, his mouth would be full of sweetness. Chao Chi also clearly felt that after coming out of the cabin, Ao Daisai licked him more frequently. Scheming Ao Daisai wanted to freeload candy. However, as a kind and loving little bear, other than being willing to let Ao Daisai freeload, what else could he do? Later, he found that Ao Daisai was very awkward. He directly peeled the candy for Ao Daisai, but Ao Daisai did not like it. Instead, Ao Daisai only liked to lick the sweetness from his mouth. Chao Chi, ? Some bears really had bad habits. The weather was cold, and walking on the road did not feel hot anymore. Other than the lack of food, everything was fine. Walking. Chao Chi was already used to this rhythm and even optimistically admired the surrounding scenery. It was so beautiful. A layer of white fog appeared on the beach in autumn, and a group of huge and fat walruses were shrouded in it. Layer upon layer, it was like a fantasy. It was difficult for humans to observe such a beautiful scenery in such a favorable climate. However, polar bears could walk through it casually and even covet these fat walruses. However, they were just looking, right? Chao Chi looked up at Ao Daisai, who seemed to be purely passing by, and sighed countless times. If Ao Daisai did not lead the way, would he dare to pass by these walruses? He did not dare. In the end, Ao Daisai did not attack the walruses, who had strong attack power. The walruses' weight and long tusks were a threat, and it was difficult to sneak up on their cubs. His target was the fish in the Silent Bay. Although he could not eat to his heart's content, he could satisfy the hungry little bear. Xiao Qishi was still growing. He did not eat much after coming out of the wooden house, so he consumed some of the fat on his body. In addition, he was in the middle of puberty. In the autumn, he looked more handsome, and the childishness on his body had lessened. However, to Ao Daisai, he was still a little bear that needed to be cared for. Little Bear came to the edge of the water and looked at his current appearance. His face and facial features had matured a little. Very good. He already had the aura of a polar king. In time, he would definitely be able to shake the Arctic and become a legendary polar bear. Sigh. To be honest, Xiao Qishi still preferred Ao Daisai's cool brother, who was really domineering and handsome, compared to his own creamy little bear, who did not have any murderous intent in his eyes. Of course, he knew that the murderous intent in the other's body was not innate. It was accumulated through fighting. What was the only way to become a cool polar bear? Fight, 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 catch fish in the water, fight, and after eating, practice with Ao Daisai's claws. Ao Daisai's broad and strong back was hit by the little polar bear.